He paid silver coins for the bride no one would touch, the woman they forced to hide her face under a filthy sack. But when that cloth finally fell away in his mountain cabin, Caleb Thorne froze. What he saw wasn't the monster they'd promised. It was something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about loneliness, second chances, and what makes a person truly beautiful. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The wind that tore through Helena, Montana Territory in February of 1876 wasn't the kind that merely chilled. It was the sort that carved into bone, the type that made strong men question their faith and weak men abandon it entirely. It howled through the skeletal fingers of pine trees, rattled the shutters of the territorial courthouse, and drove needles of ice against every exposed surface with relentless fury. On a morning when sensible people huddled near stoves and prayed for spring, a crowd gathered in the muddy yard behind Garrett's trading post, their breath rising in ghostly plumes, their faces hard with the particular cruelty that frontier life sometimes bred in human hearts. They'd come to see the mail-order brides. It was a spectacle that drew onlookers like moths to flame, desperate women, shipped west like furniture or livestock, standing on display while prospective husbands circled and evaluated. Some came from failed farms back east. Others fled scandal or poverty or families that saw them as burdens. The territory needed women. Lonely men paid for passage and papers. It was business, cold and transactional as the wind that froze their tears. But even in a practice built on desperation, there were hierarchies. Anna Rose stood apart from the others, and not by choice, while 7 other women waited in a nervous line, dressed in their best worn dresses, hair pinned hopefully beneath modest bonnets. Anna stood 15 feet away in the mud, her entire head and shoulders covered by a burlap sack. The rough fabric, stained with what might have been flour or feed, had been tied at her neck with twine. 2 small holes had been cut near where her eyes would be, but they were positioned poorly, forcing her to tilt her head at odd angles to see anything beyond the brown darkness of her imprisonment. She'd been standing there for 3 hours. Her fingers had lost feeling 2 hours ago. Her feet, wrapped in boots that hadn't been adequate even before they'd worn through at the soles, no longer registered as parts of her body. She couldn't feel the cold anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the weight of humiliation and the smaller, harder weight of resignation that had settled in her chest like a stone. This was the 3rd town, the 3rd display, the 3rd failure. Jesus Christ, Garrett, you still trying to pawn that one off? A man's voice, thick with whiskey and disdain, cut through the murmur of the crowd. Laughter followed, rough, mean laughter that Anna had learned not to flinch at. She'd used up her flinches somewhere between Pittsburgh and St. Louis. She's paid for through passage, Garrett answered, his tone defensive. The trader was a squat man with a face like a fist and a gift for numbers that didn't extend to human decency. Contract says I find her a placement or her kin get their deposit back. And I ain't giving back no deposits. Then you better lower your standards for placement, someone called out. Maybe try the hog farms. More laughter. One of the other women, a pale girl with red hair who Anna had heard was from Boston, made a small sound of sympathy, quickly stifled when the woman beside her drove an elbow into her ribs. There was a hierarchy even among the desperate, and aligning yourself with Anna Rowe was social suicide. Anna Rowe. Even her name felt like something that belonged to someone else now. She'd been Anna Rowe in Philadelphia when her mother was alive and their small house near the textile mill had smelled like bread and lamp oil. She'd been Anna Rowe when she'd worked as a seamstress, her fingers flying over fine stitches while the factory girls gossiped about beaux and dances. She'd been Anna Rowe when fever took her mother, when her uncle's family had taken her in with faces full of Christian duty and hearts full of cold arithmetic. "You'll work for your keep," Aunt Margaret had said, her thin lips barely moving, "and you'll be grateful for the charity." Grateful. Anna had been grateful at first, even as her uncle's children mocked her clothes, even as her aunt served her smaller portions and assigned her the hardest chores. She'd been grateful even when her cousin Robert started finding excuses to corner her in narrow hallways, his breath hot on her neck, his hands grabbing. She'd stopped being grateful the night she'd finally shoved him away hard enough that he'd fallen, cracking his head on the doorframe. The blood had been spectacular, head wounds always were, and the screaming had brought the whole household running. Robert had lied with tears streaming down his face, claiming she'd attacked him in a fit of madness. Her uncle had believed him instantly. Her aunt had called her a demon. And within a week, they'd contacted a mail-order registry and paid for her passage west, along with a fee that would be refunded once she was successfully placed. The contract had been specific. Anna Rowe was described as plain-faced, sturdy build, adequate domestic skills, quiet disposition. What it didn't say, but what her uncle had made clear to Garrett in a separate letter that Anna wasn't supposed to have seen but had, was that she was difficult, possibly unstable, and best kept under firm control. That letter was why she wore the sack. Protection, Garrett had explained in Kansas City, the first stop, standing too close and breathing stale tobacco into her face. Some girls, they got faces that help them find placements. You? Your face is going to hurt your chances, so we'll just keep it covered. Let your other qualities speak first. Her other qualities. Her ability to scrub floors and birth calves and survive on scraps. Her willingness to accept whatever man would take her, because the alternative was being sent back to Philadelphia in disgrace, or worse, being left in some frontier town with no money and no prospects, and winter coming on like a hammer. So she'd put on the sack, and she'd stood in Kansas City while men looked at the other women and studiously ignored her. And then in Cheyenne, where a drunk had tried to pull the sack off just for a look, and Garrett had stopped him only because it might damage the merchandise. And now here, in Helena, where the wind was trying to freeze her to death, and the crowd was laying bets on whether anyone would take her even as a field hand. I got 50 cents says she's still here come spring thaw. 50 cents says Garrett shoots her himself before then, just to be done with it. Might be doing her a favor. Through the poorly cut eye holes, Anna watched the other women being evaluated. The red-haired girl from Boston went first, snapped up by a rancher who looked old enough to be her grandfather, but who paid Garrett's fee without haggling and led her away to a waiting wagon. She was lucky. The older man probably just wanted a nurse for his final years and someone to inherit the ranch. One by one, the other women found takers. A miner with kind eyes chose a widow from Ohio. A shopkeeper selected a nervous girl who couldn't have been more than 16. A farmer with 3 children took a sturdy German woman who looked like she could outwork most men. By noon, only 2 women remained besides Anna, a woman with a hair lip who was trying not to cry, and a pregnant girl who hadn't spoken since Kansas City. Garrett was getting anxious. Anna could tell by the way he kept checking his pocket watch and glancing at the sky. The storm that had been threatening all morning was finally moving in, and he wanted to close his deals before it hit. He dropped his prices. The pregnant girl went to a saloon owner who said he needed a cook. Everyone knew what she'd really be doing, but nobody said it aloud. The woman with the hair lip was purchased by a trapper who looked mean as a snake, but who paid in gold dust, which Garrett couldn't refuse. And then there was one. The crowd had mostly dispersed, people hurrying home before the storm hit in earnest. A few lingered, men with nowhere to go, watching Anna like she was a circus exhibit. Garrett stood in his doorway, calculating. He could keep her through the winter, feed her scraps, and try again in spring. Or he could cut his losses. Tell you what, he announced to the remaining gawkers. Any man takes her off my hands right now, I'll throw in a month's supplies. Flour, bacon, coffee, the works. Silence. One man spat tobacco juice into the mud and walked away. Another laughed and said something Anna couldn't hear but that made the others chuckle darkly. She felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart breaking, because that had happened so many times already that she barely noticed. This was something else. The final dissolution of hope, maybe. The acceptance that she would spend the rest of her short life as this, a creature in a sack, worth less than a month's supplies. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that stuck to her burlap hood and melted in cold rivulets down the rough fabric. She couldn't stop shivering. She was so tired of standing, of hoping, of enduring. Part of her, the growing part, wanted to simply sit down in the mud and let the cold take her. It would be faster than whatever Garrett had planned, more merciful. How much? The voice came from behind her, deep and quiet, carrying clearly despite the wind. Anna tried to turn, but the sack's eyeholes were facing wrong, and all she could see was a blur of movement and the sudden stillness that fell over the remaining crowd. I said, how much? The voice repeated. For For her? Garrett sounded genuinely surprised. You mean the sack girl? I mean the woman. How much? Anna managed to shift enough to catch a glimpse of the speaker through one eye hole. He was tall, taller than any man she'd seen in weeks, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a face weathered by years of mountain wind. Dark hair shot through with gray fell to his collar. His beard was thick and neatly trimmed. He wore buckskins and furs that looked expensive, well made. A trapper, probably, or a hunter. One of the mountain men who came down only when they absolutely had to, who preferred the company of trees to people. His eyes, even from this angle, were an impossible blue, the color of deep water or winter sky. And they were looking at her, not through her, not past her, at her. Well, Garrett's businessman instincts were warring with his surprise. Standard contract price is $50. But seeing as how she's been a difficult placement, and seeing as how you'd be doing me a favor, I asked how much, not for your life story. Garrett's face reddened. $50. Plus the supplies I promised. Take it or leave it. The tall man, Caleb, Anna would learn later, Caleb Thorne, reached into a leather pouch at his belt and drew out a handful of silver coins. He counted them into Garrett's palm with the careful precision of someone who valued money but wasn't ruled by it. The coins made soft chinking sounds that seemed loud in the sudden quiet. Supplies too, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Yes, of course, I'm a man of my word. Garrett was suddenly eager, sensing the deal might fall apart. Flour, bacon, coffee, beans, salt, good quality. I'll have my boy load your mule. Horse. I've got a horse. Right, horse. Garrett shoved the coins into his pocket and stuck out his hand. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Thorne. Caleb shook the hand once, briefly, then turned to Anna. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone approaching a spooked animal. When he was 3 feet away, he stopped. Ma'am, he said quietly, my name's Caleb Thorne. I have a cabin 8 miles up in the mountains. I live alone. I need... He paused, choosing words carefully. I could use help. Someone who knows cooking, cleaning, domestic work. In exchange, you'd have a roof, food, safety. That's what I'm offering. Not... Another pause. Not anything else. Just work and safety. You understand? Anna couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. She managed a tiny nod, even though she wasn't sure if he could see it through the sack. You can speak, Caleb said gently. If you want to refuse, now's the time. Once we leave here, we won't be back until spring. You'd be stuck with me through the winter. That's months. So if you'd rather take your chances here in town... No. The word burst out of her, muffled by burlap but vehement. No, I'll go. I'll work. I can work hard. I won't be trouble. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Sadness, maybe, or pity, but his voice remained steady. I don't doubt it, ma'am. Let's get you out of this weather. He turned to Garrett. The supplies. Now. While Garrett's boys scrambled to load a pack horse with the promised goods, Caleb untied a large dun gelding from the hitching post. The horse was magnificent, well-fed, well-groomed, its tack sturdy and expensive. This was not the horse of a poor man. Anna felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope, or might have just been desperate relief. Caleb swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down toward her. Give me your hand, ma'am. Anna's fingers were so numb she barely felt them close around his wrist. His grip was warm and strong, and in one smooth motion he lifted her up behind him on the horse as if she weighed nothing. The world tilted and spun, and suddenly she was seated sideways behind the saddle, her legs dangling, the burlap sack making it hard to balance. Hold on to my coat, Caleb instructed, and don't worry about squeezing tight. I won't bite, and I won't judge. You fall off? You could break your neck. Anna grabbed fistfuls of his fur coat and held on. She could feel the solid warmth of him through the leather and fur, could smell wood smoke and pine and something else, soap maybe, or just clean air. After months of cramped wagons and stinking trading posts and her own unwashed desperation, the smell was almost overwhelming. Garrett brought out a paper. Just need your mark, Mr. Thorne. Confirms transfer of the contract. Caleb signed with a short, neat signature, then folded the paper and tucked it into his coat. We're done? We're done. She's your responsibility now. You need anything else? You know where to find me. I won't be back. Caleb clicked his tongue, and the dun horse moved forward, the pack horse following on a lead. Behind them, Garrett was already turning away, no doubt counting his silver and congratulating himself on a difficult sale finally completed. The remaining gawkers watched them go. Anna heard one say, "Crazy bastard, probably wants her for bear bait," and another replied, "Or he's lonelier than we thought. Winter does things to a man's mind." Then the voices faded, lost in wind and distance as Caleb guided the horses away from the trading post, away from Helena, away from everything Anna had known for the past terrible months. The snow fell harder, erasing their tracks almost as soon as they were made. The world narrowed to the rhythm of the horse's gait, the warmth of the man in front of her, and the burlap darkness of her hood. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably less. Anna's arms ached from holding on, but she didn't loosen her grip. The terrain grew steeper, the trees closer. She could sense them entering the mountains even though she couldn't see properly, could feel the air change and the wind patterns shift. The horse climbed steadily, never faltering, and behind them the pack horse followed with the supplies that had sweetened her sail. Finally, Caleb spoke. "We're off the main trail now. No one around but us and the trees. You can take that damn sack off if you want." Anna's hands flew to the twine at her throat, but her fingers were too cold and clumsy. She fumbled with the knot, panic rising. She wanted the sack off, needed it off, but the twine wouldn't cooperate, and her fingers wouldn't work, and... "Easy." Caleb's voice was calm. "Hold still a second." He brought the horse to a stop, then twisted in the saddle. With one hand, he pulled a knife from his belt, not threatening, just practical, and reached back. Anna forced herself not to flinch as the blade came close. One quick motion, and the twine parted. The burlap loosened. "There," Caleb said, sheathing the knife. "Go ahead." Anna's hands shook as she pulled the sack up and off. Cold air hit her face like a slap, making her gasp. After hours of breathing her own hot, stale breath inside the burlap, the clean mountain air was almost painful. She blinked against the snow and the brightness, her eyes watering. Caleb had turned back around and was looking ahead at the trail, giving her privacy. "There's a canteen on your right, tied to the saddle. Water's cold, but it's clean." Anna found the canteen with fumbling fingers and drank. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. She drank until her stomach hurt, then made herself stop and cap the canteen. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got hours to go, and the storm's getting worse." He was right. The snow was falling so thick now that Anna could barely see 10 feet ahead. The world was white and gray and the dark green of pine trees, everything muffled and strange. But she could see it. She could see without burlap filtering everything, without those badly cut eye holes limiting her vision. She could see the mountains rising around them, massive and indifferent and beautiful. She could see the horse's ears flicking back and forth, tracking sounds. She could see Caleb's broad back, his shoulders set against the wind. She was free of the sack. The relief was so intense it bordered on pain. They rode on. The trail grew narrower, steeper. The horses navigated with sure-footed confidence that suggested they'd made this journey many times. Anna's world became the rhythm of the ride and the growing cold and the strange, cautious feeling that maybe, her luck had finally changed. It was nearly dark when they reached the cabin. It appeared suddenly through the snow, a solid structure of logs and stone tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby, sturdy and well-maintained. This wasn't some rough trapper's shack thrown together from green wood and hope. This was a home. Someone had built this to last, had planned and cared and made something permanent in the wilderness. Caleb dismounted and immediately turned to help Anna down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. Hours in the saddle, frozen muscles, exhaustion all conspiring to drop her in the snow. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her without making it seem like a big deal. "Barn first," he said. "Horses need tending before we get comfortable." Anna followed him into the barn, grateful to be out of the wind. Inside, it was warmer. Not warm, but warmer, and it smelled like hay and horses and leather. Caleb moved with efficient competence, unsaddling both horses, rubbing them down, checking their hooves, measuring out grain. Anna watched, trying to help but mostly just staying out of the way. Her hands were still too cold to be useful. "You know horses?" Caleb asked as he worked. "A little. My uncle had a cart horse. I used to feed him sometimes." "These two are easy. The Dun's name is Smoke. Pack horse is Betty. They're good animals, smart. Treat them right and they'll take care of you." He showed her where the feed was stored, where the tack belonged, how he liked things organized. His instructions were clear and patient, never condescending. Anna memorized everything, desperate to prove she could be useful, that he hadn't wasted his money. When the horses were settled, Caleb led her to the cabin. He pushed open the door and warmth rolled out, glorious and immediate. A fire burned in a large stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on log walls. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above, spartanly furnished but clean and organized. A table and two chairs sat near the fire. A rocking chair occupied one corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and books. Actual books? More than Anna had expected. Cookware hung from hooks near the hearth. Everything had a place and purpose. And in the corner, near the ladder to the loft, sat a cradle. Anna's eyes locked on it. The cradle was beautiful, carefully crafted from smooth wood with carved details along the edges. A small quilt lay folded inside, the stitching precise and delicate. Someone had made that with love. Caleb saw her looking. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and careful. "That was for my son, Luke. He's 3 now. Too big for the cradle, but I kept it. He's—" Caleb paused, and something painful moved across his face. "He's staying down in Helena with the Weavers, family friends, while he recovers from a fever. Had it bad last month. Nearly lost him. Doctor said he needs to stay warm and quiet for a few more weeks, then I can bring him home." "I'm sorry," Anna said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Not your fault. Fever comes when it comes." Caleb moved to add wood to the fire. "Point is, I need help getting this place ready for a child again. Need cooking and cleaning and basic care. That's what I'm asking of you. Can you do that?" "Yes." Anna's voice was stronger now. "Yes, I can do that." "Good." Caleb gestured to the loft. "You'll sleep up there. There's a pallet, blankets. It's warm, heat rises. I'll sleep down here by the fire. There's a bolt on the inside of the loft door. Use it if you want. I won't bother you, but I understand if you need to feel safe." The casual way he said it, the acknowledgement that she might not trust him, that she had reason to be afraid, it made Anna's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "First things first," Caleb said, all business now. "You need to get warm and eat something. Sit by the fire. I'll make coffee and heat up some stew." "I can cook," Anna protested. "That's my job now, isn't it?" "You can cook tomorrow. Tonight, you need to thaw out before your fingers fall off." There was no arguing with that tone. Anna sat in the rocking chair, which was positioned perfectly to catch the heat from the fire. Caleb moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, filling a kettle, setting it to boil, ladling stew from a pot that sat near the coals. The stew smelled like heaven, meat and vegetables and herbs, real food, not the thin gruel she'd been subsisting on. While the food heated, Caleb pulled out tin cups and plates. "You drink coffee?" "Yes." "Good. It's strong. Fair warning." The coffee was indeed strong, bitter and hot and perfect. Anna wrapped both hands around the tin cup and let the heat seep into her frozen fingers. Feeling came back in painful tingles and stabs. She didn't care. It hurt, but it meant she was alive, was warm, was safe. Caleb served the stew in silence, then sat at the table across from her with his own bowl. For a long moment, neither of them ate. Anna stared at the food, suddenly aware that this was real, that she was expected to eat at the same table as the man who'd bought her, that everything had changed in the space of a few hours. "Ma'am," Caleb said gently, "you need to eat. You're shaking." Anna's voice cracked. "I don't know your rules yet. Should I ask permission? Should I wait until you're done? I don't know how this works." Caleb set down his spoon. He looked at her directly, his blue eyes steady and serious. Listen to me carefully. There's no trick here, no test. You're not a slave or a servant or anything like that. You're a person who needed help, and I'm a person who needed help. That's all. You eat when you're hungry, you sleep when you're tired, you work because that's the agreement, but you're not property. You understand? Anna wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly. But months of being treated like cargo had taught her to trust nothing, to expect cruelty disguised as kindness. I saw your face, Caleb continued, his voice still gentle but firm. When I cut that sack off, I saw. You expected me to react, to flinch or curse or demand my money back. But I'm going to tell you something true, and I need you to hear it. Are you listening? Anna nodded, her heart hammering. You're not ugly. You're not a monster. You're a woman who's been treated badly and who's scared. That's all. And whatever anyone told you about your face, about your worth, they were wrong. You understand? They were wrong. Something broke inside Anna then. Not shattered, nothing violent or dramatic, just quietly cracked, like ice in spring thaw. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, hot and fast and overwhelming. She tried to wipe them away, embarrassed, but they kept coming. Caleb didn't move, didn't try to comfort her or tell her to stop. He just sat there, giving her space to break down, his presence steady and undemanding. When the tears finally slowed, he pushed his handkerchief across the table. Thank you, Anna whispered, wiping her face. Eat your stew before it gets cold. They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Anna was too hungry to do anything but focus on the food, which was rich and filling and exactly what her body needed. Caleb ate steadily, occasionally adding wood to the fire, checking the window where snow was piling against the glass. When they were done, he collected the dishes. I'll wash these. You go up to the loft and get some sleep. We'll talk more in the morning, figure out a routine. But for tonight, just rest. Anna climbed the ladder to the loft on shaking legs. The space was small but perfect. A pallet with thick blankets, a small trunk for storage, a tiny window that looked out on pine trees and darkness. The bolt Caleb had mentioned was there, solid and real. She stared at it for a long moment, then decided to leave it unbolted. If he'd wanted to hurt her, he'd had plenty of opportunities. And somehow, despite everything, she believed him when he said she was safe. She was asleep before her head fully settled into the pillow, exhausted beyond measure, warm for the first time in months. Downstairs, Caleb washed the dishes and banked the fire for the night. He looked up at the closed loft door and allowed himself one quiet sigh. Then he spread his bedroll near the hearth, checked that his rifle was loaded and within reach, not because of the woman sleeping above, but because mountain nights held their own dangers, and settled in for sleep. The storm howled outside, burying the world in white. But inside the cabin, two broken people had found unexpected shelter. And if neither of them knew quite what came next, at least they were warm. At least they were safe. At least they were home. Anna woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, steady, rhythmic strikes that echoed through the pre-dawn stillness. For a moment, confusion swamped her. The ceiling above was rough-hewn logs, not the water-stained plaster of her uncle's attic. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, not mildew and disappointment. Then memory crashed back. The trading post, the burlap sack, the tall man with impossible blue eyes who'd paid 50 silver coins and asked nothing in return except work. Caleb Thorne. His cabin. His mountains. She sat up quickly, panic fluttering in her chest. What time was it? Had she overslept? Was he angry? The light filtering through the small window was gray and thin. Early morning, but how early? She scrambled out of the blankets, wincing as her muscles protested. Yesterday's ride had left her stiff and sore in places she'd forgotten existed. The loft was cold despite Caleb's assurance that heat rose. Anna's breath misted in front of her face as she hastily braided her hair and tried to smooth the wrinkles from her dress. The same dress she'd worn for weeks, stained and worn, but the only one she had. Downstairs, the cabin was empty, the fire burning low. Through the window, she could see Caleb in the clearing, splitting logs with methodical precision. He'd already been at it long enough to build a substantial pile. Anna hurried to add wood to the fire, then looked around trying to orient herself. What did he expect her to do first? Start breakfast? Clean something? She moved toward the shelves where she'd seen supplies last night, her hands already reaching for flour and coffee, when the cabin door opened and Caleb stepped inside with an armload of split wood. "Morning," he said, his voice neutral. Snow dusted his shoulders and clung to his beard. "You didn't have to rush down. Sun's barely up." "I should have been up before you," Anna said quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Stop." Caleb set the wood down by the hearth and brushed snow from his coat. "I've been splitting wood since I was 12 years old. Don't need supervision or company for it. You slept because you needed to sleep, that's all." He moved past her to the water bucket, ladled some into a basin, and washed his hands with methodical care. Anna watched, uncertain, as he dried them on a cloth and then turned to face her properly. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had last night. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe 40, maybe more, with lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Not a handsome man by conventional standards, but striking in the way mountains were striking, solid, weathered, permanent. "You know how to make coffee?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. Make us a pot while I feed the chickens." "Chickens?" Anna hadn't seen any chickens. "Small coop behind the cabin. 6 hens. They're mean as rattlesnakes, but they lay decent. Check for eggs while you're at it." He pulled his coat back on. "Supplies are marked. Coffee's in the blue tin. Sugar's scarce, so we don't use much. Eggs and bacon for breakfast if that suits you. I'm not particular about food, but I won't eat slop. Cook it right or don't cook it at all." He was gone before Anna could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. She stood in the middle of the cabin, processing. He wanted breakfast. She could do breakfast. She'd been cooking since she was old enough to reach the stove. This was familiar territory, something she could control. Anna found the blue tin and set about making coffee, measuring carefully, conscious that supplies in the mountains couldn't be wasted. While the coffee boiled, she investigated the cold box near the door and found bacon wrapped in cloth, a bowl of eggs, butter, half a loaf of bread that was starting to go stale. She could work with this. She could make something good. By the time Caleb returned, empty basket in hand, presumably filled with eggs that he'd already transferred somewhere, the cabin smelled like coffee and frying bacon. Anna had found a cast iron skillet and was cooking with focused intensity, determined to prove her worth. The bacon was crisping perfectly. She'd scrambled eggs with a splash of water to make them fluffy, the way her mother had taught her. The stale bread was sliced and waiting to be toasted in the bacon fat. Caleb hung up his coat and came to stand near the fire, warming his hands. He watched her cook without comment, his expression unreadable. Anna's hands wanted to shake under that steady gaze, but she forced them to remain steady. This was a test, even if he claimed it wasn't. Everything was a test. "Plates are in the cupboard left of the basin," Caleb said finally. "I take my coffee black." Anna served breakfast at the small table, trying not to let her nervousness show. Caleb sat down, bowed his head for a moment in what might have been prayer, then picked up his fork and took a bite of the eggs. Anna held her breath. "Good," he said after swallowing. "Real good. You weren't lying about being able to cook." The relief that flooded through Anna was so intense she nearly swayed. "Thank you. I can do better once I know what you like, what supplies we have, how the stove runs. This is fine." Caleb was already eating the bacon, steady and efficient. "Better than fine. I've been living on my own cooking for months, and I'm not much good at it. This is—" He paused, something complicated crossing his face. "This is nice. Having someone cook who knows what they're doing." They ate in silence for a while. Anna forced herself to eat even though her stomach was in knots, knowing she needed the strength. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in fresh snow that sparkled in the weak morning light. Everything looked clean and new and desperately cold. "Storm's done," Caleb said, echoing her thoughts. "We'll dig out today, make sure the barn roof didn't suffer. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I'll ride down to check on Luke. See if he's ready to come home yet." "Your son," Anna said softly. "How long has he been away?" "Month now. Longest month of my life." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Fever hit him hard, I thought." He stopped, shook his head. Dr. Weaver said he needed constant care, warm conditions, medicine I couldn't provide up here. Said if I wanted Luke to live, I had to leave him in town, so I did. But it's been eating at me every day since. That must have been hard. Hard doesn't cover it. Luke's all I've got left. His mother, my wife, Clara. She died bringing him into the world. 3 years I've been raising him alone, doing my best, trying to be both parents. Then the fever came and I couldn't. His voice cracked slightly. I couldn't protect him. Had to hand him over to someone else. A father should be able to protect his child. The raw pain in his voice made Anna's chest ache. You did protect him, she said carefully. You made the hard choice. That takes more strength than keeping him here would have. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a coward who couldn't bear watching him die. You're not a coward. A coward wouldn't have paid $50 for a stranger just to make sure his home was ready for his son's return. The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. I suppose that's one way to look at it. They finished breakfast in more companionable silence. When they were done, Caleb pushed back from the table. I'll show you around properly. You need to know where everything is, how things work. This isn't Philadelphia or wherever you're from. Mountain living has its own rules. For the next hour, Caleb gave her a tour that was part instruction, part survival lesson. He showed her the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin, stocked with potatoes, carrots, turnips, and preserved goods in sealed jars. He explained the water system, a spring 50 yards up the slope that fed into a wooden trough, which had to be checked daily for ice. He demonstrated how to bank the fire properly so it would burn all night without consuming too much wood. He introduced her to the chickens, who were indeed mean as promised, and showed her how to collect eggs without getting pecked to death. This one's Lucifer, he said, pointing to a particularly aggressive red hen. She's the worst. Goes for the eyes if you're not careful. The black one's Beelzebub. The others are just generally unpleasant. Despite everything, Anna felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. You named your chickens after demons? Luke named them. He's got a sense of humor. Caleb's face softened when he mentioned his son. Kid's smart as a whip. Too smart sometimes. Already reading simple words. Clara would have been proud. I'm sure she is, Anna said quietly. Caleb didn't respond to that, just moved on to show her the woodpile, the tool shed, the small smokehouse where he cured meat. Everything was organized with military precision, each item in its place, each system designed for efficiency and survival. This was a man who understood that carelessness in the mountains meant death. By midday, Anna's head was spinning with information, but she was starting to understand the rhythm of this place. It was harsh, yes, and isolated, but there was a kind of logic to it that appealed to her. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. It was so different from her uncle's house, where appearances mattered more than function, where food was thrown away while Anna went hungry because feeding her too much might make her ungrateful. You're quiet, Caleb observed as they walked back to the cabin through knee-deep snow. Overwhelmed. No, yes, there's a lot to learn, but I can do it. I want to do it. Anna hesitated, then added, It's just different. Good different. Everything has a reason here. Has to. Can't afford waste or stupidity this far from town. Caleb stopped at the cabin door, his hand on the latch. Listen, I know this arrangement is strange. I know you probably don't trust me yet, and that's fair, but I meant what I said last night. You're safe here. And if at any point you want to leave, come spring, when the trails are passable, I'll take you back to town myself. No questions, no punishment. You're not a prisoner. Where would I go? The question came out more bitter than Anna intended. Back to that trading post? Back to my uncle's house? There's nowhere for me, Mr. Thorne. This is better than anything I could have hoped for. Something pained flashed across Caleb's face. That's a damned sad thing to hear, ma'am, but I understand. World's not kind to women with no family, no money. I understand that better than you might think. He went inside, leaving Anna standing in the snow, wondering what he meant. What did a man like Caleb Thorne, competent and strong and clearly capable of surviving alone, understand about being powerless? The afternoon settled into a routine of work. Anna cleaned the cabin with thorough intensity, scrubbing surfaces that probably didn't need scrubbing, but doing it anyway because she needed to feel useful. Caleb worked outside, shoveling paths between the buildings, checking the barn roof, maintaining the careful order of his mountain homestead. They moved around each other like dancers learning a new pattern, careful not to collide, not yet comfortable but not hostile either. For dinner, Anna made soup from salt pork and dried beans, stretching the supplies as far as she could while still making something substantial. She baked bread, real bread, not the hardtack she'd been eating for months, and the smell of it filled the cabin like a benediction. When Caleb came in and stopped dead in the doorway, just breathing in the scent with his eyes closed, Anna felt a fierce surge of satisfaction. "Been 2 years since I've smelled fresh bread in this cabin," he said quietly. "Clara used to bake every week. I tried to keep up the habit after she died, but I'm not good at it. Always comes out like rocks." "I can teach you," Anna offered. "If you want." "Maybe." Caleb washed up and sat down. "Or maybe I'll just enjoy having someone who knows what they're doing handle it." They ate dinner as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Caleb talked a little about the mountains, about the game that lived in these woods, about the careful balance of predator and prey. Anna listened, fascinated despite herself. She'd never met anyone who spoke about nature with such respect, such understanding. "You really love it here," she said when he paused. "I do. It's hard, and it's lonely sometimes, but it's honest. Mountain doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Does what it does, and you either adapt or die. There's a purity in that." "And Luke? Does he love it too?" Caleb's expression softened. "Kid's half mountain goat already. Fearless in a way that terrifies me daily. Climbs everything, wants to explore everything. I have to watch him like a hawk because he's got no sense of danger yet. But yeah, he loves it. This is his home. Only home he's ever known." "What was his mother like?" The question was bold, maybe too bold, but Anna wanted to know, wanted to understand the woman who'd lived in this cabin, who'd made bread and raised a child and died too young. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Clara was steady. That's the word I always come back to. Steady and strong and practical. She grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, knew hard work before she could walk. When we married, she knew what she was signing up for. This cabin, this isolation, this life. Never complained, never asked for more than I could give." He paused. "She wanted children. We tried for 5 years before Luke finally came. She was so happy when she realized she was carrying, said it was worth every year of waiting. But the birth," Anna trailed off, "went wrong from the start. I knew it. She knew it. I wanted to ride for the doctor, but she said there wasn't time. She was right. I delivered Luke myself in this cabin while she bled out beneath my hands." His voice was flat now, reciting facts. "She lived long enough to hold him, long enough to make me promise I'd raise him right, raise him strong. Then she was gone. Just like that. One minute I had a wife and a newborn son, the next I had a son and a body to bury." The silence that followed was heavy with old grief. Anna didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, just sat with him in the weight of it. "I'm telling you this," Caleb continued, "because you should know. This cabin has death in its walls, Clara's death, and almost Luke's death a month ago. I don't know if that bothers you, don't know if you're superstitious, but you should know what you're living in." "Every place has death in it," Anna said quietly. "My mother died in a house in Philadelphia. People died in my uncle's house, his parents, before I lived there. Death is everywhere. It doesn't scare me." "No?" Caleb looked at her curiously. "What does scare you?" The question was so unexpected, so direct that Anna answered honestly before she could think better of it. "Being useless, being unwanted, being put back in that sack and told I'm not worth the space I take up." Something fierce flashed in Caleb's eyes. "Anyone puts a sack on you again, they answer to me, and I don't care if it's your bloodkin or the president himself." The vehemence in his voice startled her. "Why do you care? You don't know me." "I know enough. I know you've been treated like garbage when you're not. I know you cook good food and work hard and deserve better than what you've gotten. That's enough. Anna felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. You're a strange man, Mr. Thorne. Caleb, if you're going to live in my house, you might as well call me by my name. He stood and collected the dishes. And you're not useless, in case you were wondering. Today was the first day in months this place felt like a home, instead of just a building I sleep in. He washed the dishes while Anna sat by the fire, her mind spinning. This man, this strange, gruff, unexpectedly kind man, was nothing like what she'd expected. Nothing like the monster her aunt had promised would claim her. Nothing like her uncle or her cousin or the men at the trading post who'd looked at her with contempt and disgust. Caleb Thorne looked at her like she was a person. It was such a simple thing, and yet it felt revolutionary. That night, as Anna lay in the loft listening to the cabin settle and Caleb's quiet breathing from below, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning, but the quieter, steadier hope of someone who'd found unexpected ground beneath their feet. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if this arrangement would last, if Caleb would change his mind, if she would somehow ruin this fragile peace. But for tonight, she was warm. She was fed. She was safe. It was more than enough. Morning came cold and clear, the sky a hard blue that promised no mercy and no warmth. Anna was up before dawn this time, determined not to be caught sleeping while Caleb worked. She dressed in the dark and climbed down the ladder to find him already building up the fire, his movements quiet and practiced. Morning, he said without turning around. Sleep well? Yes, thank you. Anna moved to start breakfast. You said you might ride down to check on Luke today? Planning on it. Weather's clear. Should make good time. He straightened, stretching his back. I'll be gone most of the day. You all right being alone here? Of course. Anna tried to sound more confident than she felt. The idea of being alone in this isolated cabin was daunting, but she wasn't about to admit it. I'll keep the fire going, take care of the animals, maybe do some mending. Caleb studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. There's a rifle above the door. You know how to shoot? No. Then don't touch it unless a bear's breaking down the door, and even then you're better off hiding in the loft. Bears mostly leave people alone if you don't provoke them, but a wounded bear's a dangerous thing. He paused. Actually, everything up here's dangerous if you don't respect it. The cold, the animals, the terrain. Don't go wandering off. Don't try to explore. Stay close to the cabin. Understand? I understand. Good. He moved to get his coat. I'll try to be back before dark, but if I'm not, don't panic. Could be the trail's worse than I thought, or Luke needs another day, or a dozen other things. You just keep the fire going and stay inside. If I'm not back by tomorrow noon, then you can start worrying. Anna nodded, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. This was part of mountain living, she reminded herself. Self-reliance. Trust. The ability to be alone without falling apart. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, Caleb saddled Smoke and prepared to leave. Anna walked him to the barn, watching as he secured his pack and checked his gear with methodical care. Every movement spoke of experience, of countless journeys made and survived. One more thing, Caleb said, swinging into the saddle. There's a box in the loft near the trunk. Claire's things, dresses mostly, and some other clothes. You're about her size, maybe a bit smaller. You should have something clean to wear, something warm. Help yourself to whatever fits. Before Anna could respond, before she could process the intimacy of that offer, the trust it implied, Caleb had clicked his tongue and Smoke was moving, carrying him away from the cabin and down the mountain trail. Anna stood in the snow and watched until he disappeared into the trees, then turned and walked back into the suddenly too quiet cabin. The day stretched ahead of her, empty and full at the same time. She threw herself into work, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, organizing things that were already organized, anything to keep busy. The chickens got fed and watered, the fire got tended, the cabin got swept, and all the while Anna's eyes kept drifting to the ladder that led to the loft, to the box Caleb had mentioned, Clara's things. It felt like a violation somehow, to touch a dead woman's belongings. But Anna's dress was filthy and falling apart, and Caleb had given permission, more than permission he'd offered, Surely Clara would understand. Surely she wouldn't begrudge another woman a clean dress, especially when that woman was trying to care for her home and prepare for her son's return. Anna climbed the ladder and found the box easily, a cedar chest tucked against the wall, beautiful and well made. She lifted the lid carefully, and the smell of lavender rose up, along with something else: cedar and wool and the faint, indefinable scent of another person's life. Inside were dresses, carefully folded and preserved. Simple, practical dresses in sturdy fabrics: brown wool, dark blue cotton, gray linen, a winter coat lined with rabbit fur, undergarments, stockings, a nightgown, and at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a dress of deep green that was finer than the others, with careful stitching and a lace collar. Clara's best dress, maybe. Her wedding dress or Sunday dress. Anna lifted out the brown wool dress and held it up. It would fit, she thought, maybe a little loose in the shoulders, maybe a little long, but it would fit. And it was clean. God, it was clean and whole and would be warm. She changed quickly, almost guiltily, folding her ruined dress and setting it aside. The wool felt strange against her skin, soft and expensive in a way she'd almost forgotten existed. When she descended the ladder and caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror near the basin, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Clean dress, clean face, hair neatly braided. She looked almost respectable. The thought made her laugh, a short, sharp sound that echoed strangely in the empty cabin. Respectable. As if a dress could erase months of humiliation. As if fabric could change what she was. A woman no one wanted, bought for $50 and a month's supplies. But when she looked in the mirror again, she saw something else too. Not just the respectable dress, but the way she stood differently in it. Straighter, stronger. The way wearing something clean and whole made her feel less like cargo and more like a person. Maybe that was what Caleb had known. Maybe that was why he'd mentioned the box. The day passed slowly. Anna cooked, cleaned, mended holes in Caleb's shirts that she found in a basket near the hearth. She read from one of his books, a volume of poetry that surprised her with its tenderness. She watched the sun track across the sky and tried not to worry about the man who'd ridden down the mountain that morning. He'd be fine. He knew these mountains. He'd made this journey hundreds of times. But what if he wasn't fine? What if something happened? What would she do, alone in this cabin with winter closing in and no way to get help? Anna forced the thoughts away and focused on preparing dinner: venison stew, using meat from the cold box and vegetables from the root cellar. By the time the sun began to set, painting the snow in brilliant oranges and purples, the stew was ready and the cabin smelled like home. But Caleb didn't come. Anna ate alone, trying not to let worry consume her. He'd said he might be late. He'd said not to panic. She forced herself to clean up, to bank the fire properly, to go through the evening routine Caleb had taught her. Then she climbed to the loft and lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and the creaking of the cabin and the terrible silence of being alone. She didn't sleep. She lay awake for hours, every sound making her tense, wondering if it was Caleb returning or something worse: a bear, a mountain lion, bandits. Her imagination conjured 1,000 disasters. Finally, somewhere deep in the night, she heard it: the sound of a horse's hooves in snow, the creak of the barn door, the low murmur of a voice, Caleb's voice, talking to Smoke as he unsaddled him. Anna nearly sobbed with relief. She heard him come into the cabin, heard him add wood to the fire and move around quietly, trying not to wake her. She almost called down to let him know she was awake, but something stopped her. Instead, she lay in the darkness and listened to him settle for the night. The sounds of another person in the house, suddenly the most comforting thing in the world. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd ask about Luke, about the journey, about when the boy would come home. Tomorrow she'd prove herself even more useful, more valuable, more worth the $50 Caleb had spent. But tonight, she just let herself feel grateful. Grateful for the warm dress, for the safe cabin, for the man downstairs who'd ridden through the dark to come home. Grateful that she wasn't alone anymore, even if this was temporary, even if it couldn't last. For the first time since her mother died, Anna Rowe fell asleep feeling something close to peace. And downstairs, sitting by the fire he'd just rebuilt, Caleb Thorne stared into the flames and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. The cabin had felt different the moment he'd walked in, warmer somehow, despite the banked fire. It smelled like cooking and cleaning and life. And when he'd seen the brown wool dress folded carefully over the rocking chair, Claire's dress, the one she'd worn most often, something had twisted in his chest. This strange, scared woman was wearing his dead wife's clothes, was sleeping in his cabin, was making it feel like home again after 3 years of just surviving. And Luke had asked about her, had wanted to know if the lady was nice, if she would like him, if she would stay. The boy was starving for a mother's care, for softness in a world that had been all hard edges since Clara died. Caleb had told him yes, had promised the lady was nice, that she would stay, at least through the winter. And Luke's face had lit up in a way Caleb hadn't seen since before the fever, so now he was committed. To this arrangement, to this woman, to whatever this was becoming. He'd brought her here for practical reasons. He needed help. She needed safety. Simple transaction. But nothing felt simple anymore. Nothing felt like just a transaction when he came home to the smell of cooking and saw light in the windows and knew someone was waiting. Not waiting for him exactly, just waiting. Being there. Existing in the same space. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous to get used to it, because come spring she might leave. Probably would leave once she realized she had options, once she understood she didn't have to settle for a lonely mountain man and his cabin full of ghosts. But for now, for tonight, Caleb let himself enjoy the warmth, the full belly, the knowledge that tomorrow he'd wake to fresh coffee and conversation and something that almost felt like family. It was more than he'd had in years. It was more than he'd let himself hope for. And God help him, he wanted it to last. Morning arrived with Caleb already moving around downstairs, and Anna dressed quickly in another of Clara's dresses. This one a dark blue cotton that felt soft against her skin. When she climbed down the ladder, she found him packing supplies into a leather satchel, his movements purposeful and slightly hurried. "He's ready," Caleb said without preamble, not looking up from his work. "Luke, doctor says the fever's gone, lungs are clear. I can bring him home today." Anna's heart jumped, excitement mixed with sudden, sharp anxiety. A child. She'd be caring for an actual child, not just maintaining an empty cabin. That's wonderful. You must be so relieved. Relieved doesn't cover it. Caleb's hand stilled on the satchel strap, and when he looked at her, his eyes were bright with emotion he didn't try to hide. Felt like I was missing half my soul this past month, like I couldn't breathe right with him gone. He cleared his throat roughly. "I'll head out within the hour. Should be back by late afternoon if the weather holds." "What should I do? To prepare, I mean, for Luke." Anna twisted her hands together, suddenly aware of how little she knew about children. She'd helped mind her cousin's babies occasionally, but always under strict supervision, always with someone ready to criticize her every move. Caleb straightened, considering her with that steady, assessing gaze that made her feel both exposed and strangely safe. "Kid's been sick, so he'll be tired easy. Probably scared too. He's been away from home longer than ever before. He'll need patience, gentleness." He paused. "He'll also test you. Luke's got a mind of his own and a stubborn streak wide as the Missouri. Don't let him run over you, but don't break his spirit either. That make sense?" "I think so, yes." "Good." Caleb moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Anna, Miss Rowe, I need you to understand something. Luke is everything to me. Everything. If I thought for 1 second you'd hurt him or neglect him or—" "I won't," Anna interrupted, her voice firm. "I swear to you, I won't. I know what it's like to be a child no one wants, no one protects. I would never—" Her voice caught. "I would never do that to anyone, especially not to a child who's already lost his mother." Something in Caleb's face softened. "I believe you. Don't know why, but I do." He pulled on his coat. "Make something good for dinner. Something a kid would like. Luke's been living on broth and soft foods for weeks. He'll be hungry for real food." After he left, Anna stood in the center of the cabin and tried to calm her racing thoughts. A child. She'd be responsible for a child. The weight of it settled over her shoulders like a physical thing, heavy but not unwelcome. This was what she'd agreed to. This was the work Caleb had bought her for. Except it didn't feel like being bought anymore. It felt like being trusted. Anna threw herself into preparation with almost frantic energy. She cleaned the cabin again, paying special attention to the areas a small child might touch or explore. She checked the loft ladder to make sure it was secure. A 3-year-old could climb, might try to follow her up. She moved anything dangerous or breakable to higher shelves. She baked fresh bread and prepared a stew that would be ready when they returned, using dried apples from the root cellar to make a sweet compote she hoped Luke would like. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Anna found herself checking the window constantly, watching the trail for any sign of movement. The chickens got fed twice because she forgot she'd already done it. She reorganized the same shelf 3 times. Her nervous energy had nowhere to go except into endless small tasks that didn't really need doing. What if Luke hated her on sight? What if he cried for his father to send her away? What if she did something wrong, said something wrong, proved herself as useless as her aunt had always claimed? The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when Anna finally heard it, the sound of a horse approaching, but different this time. Slower. More careful. She rushed to the window and saw Caleb on Smoke, but he wasn't alone. Bundled in front of him, wrapped in what looked like half a dozen blankets, was a small figure. Luke. Anna's hands flew to smooth her dress, her hair, as if making herself presentable could somehow make this go right. Then she forced herself to step away from the window, to wait by the fire like a normal person, not like a desperate woman whose entire future might depend on whether a 3-year-old child accepted her. The cabin door opened and cold air rushed in along with Caleb, who stepped inside carefully, his precious cargo held secure against his chest. "We're home, buddy," he said softly. "Remember? I told you about home." A small voice, hoarse and uncertain, answered. "Cold." "I know, but it's warm inside, see?" Caleb moved toward the fire, and that's when Anna got her first clear look at Luke Thorne. He was small, even for 3 years old, made smaller by illness and wrapped in layers of blankets until only his face showed. That face was pale, with dark circles under eyes that were the same impossible blue as his father's, dark hair stuck up in tufts where it had been pressed against Caleb's coat. But there was something in his expression, even exhausted as he was, that spoke of intelligence and curiosity and a will that hadn't been broken by fever or fear. Those blue eyes locked on Anna, and she saw him stiffen in his father's arms. "Who?" Luke asked, his small hand clutching at Caleb's coat. "This is Miss Anna," Caleb said gently, crouching down so Luke could see her better without having to look up. "Remember I told you she's going to help take care of you while you finish getting strong again. She's been making this cabin nice for you." Luke studied Anna with an intensity that felt far too adult for such a small child. She forced herself to stay still, to let him look his fill, to not do anything that might startle or frighten him. This moment mattered. She could feel it in her bones. "You live here now?" Luke's voice was quiet, rough from illness. Anna knelt down slowly, bringing herself to his eye level. "If that's all right with you. Your papa thought you might need someone to make good food and keep things warm while he works. But this is your home, Luke, yours and your papa's. I'm just here to help." Luke considered this gravely. Then, with the blunt honesty of small children everywhere, he asked, "Are you pretty?" The question hit Anna like a physical blow. She felt her face flush, felt the old shame rising. What could she say? That she was the woman men paid not to look at? That she'd worn a sack over her head because her face was considered that offensive? But before she could formulate any answer, Caleb spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "That's not a polite question, Luke. We don't ask people that." "Why not? Mama was pretty. Mrs. Weaver said so. She showed me the drawing." "Your mama was beautiful," Caleb agreed, "but that's not the most important thing about a person. Miss Anna is kind. That matters more than pretty." Luke turned back to Anna, those blue eyes measuring. "Are you kind?" This, at least, was a question she could try to answer honestly. "I try to be. I'm not perfect at it, but I promise I'll try my best with you. Is that enough?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once, decisively, like a judge delivering a verdict. "Okay. Can I have food now? I'm hungry." The tension broke like a snapped thread. Caleb laughed, the sound rough with relief, and stood up with Luke still in his arms. "Let's get these blankets off you first, buddy. You're wrapped up like a mummy." Anna watched as Caleb carefully unwound the layers, revealing a thin child in clothes that hung loose on his small frame. Luke had lost weight during his illness. Too much weight for such a little body. But he stood on his own feet once Caleb set him down, swaying slightly but determined, and that determination sent a fierce surge of protectiveness through Anna's chest. "Stew's ready," she said, keeping her voice calm and normal. "And I made apple compote. It's sweet." "I like sweet things," Luke announced, then immediately started coughing, a wet, rattling sound that made Caleb's face tighten with worry. "Easy, son. Breathe slow." Caleb rubbed Luke's back until the coughing subsided. "Doctor said the cough might linger a while. Doesn't mean the fever's back, just means his lungs are still healing." Luke nodded, catching his breath, then spotted the rocking chair near the fire. "That's Mama's chair." "It was," Caleb said carefully. "Now it's just a chair. You want to sit in it while Miss Anna gets your food?" But Luke was already climbing up into the chair, his small body swallowed by it, his feet dangling well above the floor. He started to rock, the motion gentle and soothing, and closed his eyes. "Mama used to rock me when I was a baby. You told me that story." "I did. She loved rocking you." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. He looked at Anna, and she saw the rawness in his face, grief and love and fear all tangled together. Anna moved quickly to serve the food, giving Caleb a moment to compose himself. She filled a small bowl with stew, made sure it wasn't too hot, added a piece of fresh bread broken into manageable chunks. The apple compote went into a separate, smaller bowl. When she brought it to Luke, he opened his eyes and looked at the food with an expression of wonder. "That's a lot," he said. "You don't have to eat it all. Just eat until you're full." Anna set the bowls on the small table. "Do you want to sit at the table or stay in the chair?" "Table. Papa says we eat at the table like civilized people." Luke climbed down from the rocking chair and went to the table, where Caleb was already pulling out a chair for him. The boy had to kneel on the chair to reach his food properly, but he managed it with the kind of determination that was clearly characteristic. Anna served Caleb and herself, and they all sat down to dinner as the last light faded from the sky and the fire crackled warm beside them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Luke was too focused on his food, eating with the single-minded intensity of a child who'd been denied solid food for too long. Caleb watched his son with naked relief on his face, and Anna felt something unfurl in her chest, something fragile and dangerous and almost like belonging. "This is real good, Miss Anna," Luke said suddenly, his mouth still half full of bread. "Better than Mrs. Weaver's." "Don't talk with your mouth full," Caleb corrected gently, but he was smiling. Luke swallowed dramatically. "Better than Mrs. Weaver's," he repeated. "She made everything mushy, said it was easier on sick tummies. But I'm not sick anymore." "You're getting better," Caleb corrected. "Still need to be careful. Still need to rest a lot." Luke's face scrunched up in displeasure. "Resting is boring." "Resting is how you stay alive long enough to do unboring things later." Caleb's tone was firm but warm. "Doctor's orders, remember? You promised you'd be good." "I'm being good right now. I'm eating vegetables." Luke pointed at a piece of carrot in his stew as if it were irrefutable evidence of his virtue. Anna found herself smiling despite her nerves. The boy was charming in that unconscious way children could be, saying exactly what he thought with no filter, no artifice. It was refreshing after months of dealing with adults who said one thing and meant another. After dinner, Caleb carried Luke to the rocking chair and wrapped him in a clean blanket while Anna cleaned up. She could hear them talking quietly, Caleb's deep voice mixing with Luke's higher one, the words indistinct but the tone affectionate. When she glanced over, she saw Luke starting to nod off against his father's chest, his small fingers clutching Caleb's shirt. "Should I make up the cradle?" Anna asked quietly. Caleb shook his head. "Too small for him now. He'll sleep in the loft with me tonight, until he's steadier on his feet." He paused. "You all right taking the bedroll down here? Just for tonight?" "Of course." Anna would have slept on the floor without blankets if it meant Luke could be comfortable. "Whatever he needs." "Appreciate it. Appreciate Tuoka-san." Caleb stood carefully, cradling his sleeping son. "I'll get him settled, then come back down to help with. I can handle it. You stay with him." Anna shooed him toward the ladder. "I'll bank the fire and make sure everything's secure. You just take care of your boy." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for today, for making this easy for him. For. He stopped, shook his head. Just thank you. He climbed the ladder with Luke secure in his arms, moving with practiced ease despite the awkward angle. Anna heard the soft sounds of settling, of Caleb's low voice murmuring something to his son, and then quiet. She finished cleaning up, moving through the cabin as silently as she could. The bedroll Caleb had mentioned was stored in the trunk near the hearth, thick wool blankets and a pallet that would be comfortable enough. She spread it out near the fire, close enough for warmth, but not so close she'd risk burning in her sleep. The cabin was peaceful in a way she'd never experienced. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Inside, the fire popped and settled. Above, a small child slept safely in his father's arms. And Anna, for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt like she had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. She was needed here. Luke needed her cooking, her care. Caleb needed her help managing the household and his son. It wasn't love, wasn't family in any real sense, but it was close enough to matter, close enough to make her want to fight to keep it. Anna lay down on the bedroll and pulled the blankets up, watching the firelight dance across the log walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Luke's recovery, establishing routines, figuring out how to navigate this strange new configuration of people sharing space. But tonight she could just rest in the knowledge that she'd passed some kind of test. Luke hadn't rejected her. Caleb hadn't regretted bringing her here. It was enough. She drifted towards sleep, listening to the comfortable sounds of the cabin, fire, wind, the slight creak of the loft as someone shifted position. Safe sounds. Home sounds. The next week settled into a rhythm that was sometimes smooth and sometimes chaotic, but always purposeful. Luke's presence transformed the cabin from a quiet, orderly space into something louder and messier and infinitely more alive. He was everywhere at once, it seemed, climbing, exploring, asking endless questions about everything he saw. Why is snow white? Why do chickens have feathers? Why can't I go outside without my coat? Why is the sky blue? Why do you talk different than Papa? Anna answered what she could and directed him to his father for the rest. She learned quickly that Luke was clever and curious and utterly without fear, which made him dangerous to himself in about 17 different ways. He tried to climb the ladder to the loft and fell off, earning a bruise and a stern lecture from Caleb. He attempted to pet Lucifer the demon chicken and nearly lost a finger. He decided to help with cooking and knocked over a pot of soup that thankfully had cooled enough not to scald him. Through it all, Anna found herself falling halfway in love with the impossible child. His resilience amazed her, barely a month removed from nearly dying, and he threw himself at life with complete commitment. His joy was infectious. His laughter, when it came, was the purest sound she'd ever heard. And watching Caleb with Luke revealed depths to the man she was only beginning to understand. Caleb was patient in a way that seemed almost supernatural, explaining things carefully, setting boundaries firmly but kindly, never raising his voice even when Luke pushed every limit he could find. The love between them was palpable, a force that filled the cabin and made Anna's chest ache with something that might have been envy or longing or simply recognition of what family could be. "You're good with him," Caleb said one evening after Luke had finally fallen asleep. They were sitting by the fire, Anna mending and Caleb cleaning his rifle, the domestic scene almost painfully normal. "He makes it easy. He's a wonderful child. He's a handful is what he is." But Caleb was smiling. "Wears me out completely. I don't know how Clara managed him as a baby. I could barely handle him with help." "Did you have help? After she died?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the rifle. "Some. Mrs. Weaver came up for the first few months, taught me the basics. How to change him, feed him, get him to sleep. But mostly it was just me and Luke figuring it out together." He resumed cleaning, his movements methodical. "Made a lot of mistakes. Still do. But he's alive and mostly happy, so I figure I haven't completely failed." "You haven't failed at all. He adores you." "Feelings mutual." Caleb looked up at the loft where his son slept. "That month he was gone. I kept coming back here to an empty cabin, and it was like the fever had taken me too. Like I was dead and just hadn't realized it yet. Having him back, having the place full of noise and mess and life again." He trailed off, shook his head. Makes me realize how close I came to losing everything that matters. Anna set down her mending, choosing her words carefully. Can I ask you something? Can't promise I'll answer, but you can ask. Why did you really buy my contract? I don't mean the practical reasons, needing help with Luke. I mean the real reason. You could have hired someone from town, someone without a sack on their head, someone who wouldn't have been a risk. Caleb was silent for so long Anna thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set the rifle aside and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fire. You want the truth? Please. I saw them. The men at that trading post. Saw how they looked at you, or didn't look at you. Like you weren't human, like you were garbage that was cluttering up their view. His voice went hard. And I saw Garrett calculating how to cut his losses. And I thought about Clara, about how she'd look at me if I walked away and left you there. About what kind of man just stands by and watches cruelty happen because it's not his problem. He turned to look at Anna directly, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. You asked me once what I understood about being powerless. I understand plenty. After Clara died, people in town looked at me different. Poor Caleb Thorne can't even keep a wife alive. Poor Caleb Thorne probably killed her with his selfishness, dragging her up to that mountain. Poor Caleb Thorne, alone with a newborn, making a mess of everything. They didn't say it to my face, but I heard the whispers, felt the judgment, knew they were just waiting for me to fail, to prove them right. But you didn't fail. Didn't I? My wife is dead. My son nearly died. I'm living alone on a mountain because I can't stomach being around people who think they know my life better than I do. Caleb's jaw tightened. So yeah, when I saw you standing in that mud with a sack on your head, treated like you weren't worth basic human dignity, I understood. And I couldn't walk away. $50 seemed like a small price to pay to stop that particular cruelty. Anna felt tears prick her eyes. That's the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. You know that? It's not kind. It's just decent. Or it should be decent. World's gone to hell if basic decency counts as extraordinary kindness. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, the weight of shared understanding settling like snow. Outside, an owl called, long, lonely notes that echoed through the darkness. Inside, the cabin was warm and safe, and filled with the presence of three people who were learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be something like a family. The days grew shorter as winter deepened its hold. Snow fell almost daily, building up until the cabin windows were half buried and the world outside became a white, pristine wilderness that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Caleb made regular trips to check the trap lines and hunt for fresh meat, always returning before dark. Always careful never to leave Anna and Luke alone for too long. Luke grew stronger week by week. His cough faded. Color returned to his pale cheeks. His energy became boundless, requiring constant supervision and creative solutions to keep him occupied during the long winter days when going outside was dangerous. Anna taught him simple songs and games. She showed him how to knead bread dough, which he loved because it let him pound something without getting in trouble. She told him stories, modified fairy tales with the scary parts removed, stories about brave children and kind animals and happy endings that she desperately wanted to believe in. And Luke, in his unself-conscious way, taught her things too. He taught her how to laugh without guilt, how to play without worrying about judgment, how to exist in the moment without constantly calculating her worth or anticipating punishment. You're smiling more, Caleb observed one afternoon while Luke napped and they worked side by side preparing dinner. I noticed. Anna touched her face self-consciously. I suppose I am. Is that all right? More than all right. Suits you. Makes you look... He stopped abruptly, his ears reddening slightly. Makes me look what? Nothing. Never mind. How's that stew coming? But Anna had seen something flicker across his face, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that was entirely inappropriate for a woman in her position. She was here to work, to care for Luke, to be useful. Nothing more. Getting ideas above her station would only lead to heartbreak. Still, she caught herself noticing things. The way Caleb's eyes crinkled when he smiled at his son. The strength in his hands when he chopped wood. The patience in his voice when he explained things. The way he always made sure she ate enough, stayed warm enough, had everything she needed. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, like he was trying to figure out a complicated puzzle and wasn't sure if the pieces would fit. It was dangerous, this noticing, dangerous to let herself think it might mean something. But the heart, Anna was discovering, didn't always listen to practical warnings. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Luke had gone to sleep, Caleb spoke suddenly. Spring will come eventually. Few more months. Trails will be passable again. Anna's hand stilled on the sock she was darning. Yes, I suppose they will. When that happens, when you can leave safely, I want you to know you're not obligated to stay. I know I bought your contract, but I'm not going to hold you to it if you want out. You've more than earned your passage. You've been... He searched for words. You've been good for this place, for Luke, for me, if I'm being honest. But I don't want you to feel trapped. So come spring, if you want to go back to town, find a different situation, I'll take you myself. Make sure you're settled somewhere decent. That's my promise. The words should have been reassuring, should have felt like freedom. Instead, they landed like stones in Anna's chest. He was giving her permission to leave, which meant he'd been thinking about her leaving, which meant this, whatever this was, had an expiration date that he'd already marked on some internal calendar. Thank you, Anna managed, keeping her voice steady. That's generous. It's fair. You deserve fair. But Anna didn't want fair. She wanted... God, what did she want? To stay in this cabin forever? To keep playing house with a man and child who weren't hers? To pretend that wearing a dead woman's dresses and cooking in her kitchen made Anna anything other than hired help? I'll think about it, she said finally. When spring comes. I'll think about what I want to do. Caleb nodded, seemingly satisfied, and the conversation drifted to other things. But Anna lay awake that night in the loft, listening to Luke's soft breathing beside her and Caleb's deeper sounds from below, and wondered what she would do when the snow melted and the world opened up again. Would she leave? Could she leave? This cabin had become the first real home she'd had since her mother died. Luke had become the child she'd never thought she'd have. And Caleb had become something she didn't have words for yet. Something important, something necessary. But none of it was really hers. She was still just the woman who'd been bought for $50. Still just the servant wearing borrowed dresses. Still just temporary, no matter how permanent it felt in the darkness with snow falling outside and warmth seeping up from the fire below. Anna turned over, careful not to wake Luke, and tried to convince herself that when the time came, she'd be strong enough to do whatever needed doing. Whether that meant staying or leaving, she'd find the courage. She had to. Because the alternative, breaking apart in this cabin that had taught her what safety felt like, was too terrible to contemplate. The thought of leaving haunted Anna through the following weeks like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. She'd catch herself in the middle of ordinary tasks, kneading bread, folding laundry, reading to Luke, and the question would rise unbidden. Could she really walk away from this? Each morning she woke to the sound of Caleb building up the fire. Each evening she sat across from him at dinner. Each night she climbed to the loft, knowing he was just below, and the answer became more complicated, more tangled with feelings she had no right to harbor. Winter deepened its grip on the mountains with a ferocity that made the previous weeks seem mild by comparison. Snow fell in sheets that turned the world white and formless. The wind howled like something alive and hungry, rattling the shutters and seeking every crack in the cabin's defenses. On the worst days, Caleb wouldn't risk going outside except to reach the barn, and even that short distance required ropes tied between buildings so he wouldn't lose his way in the blinding white. "This is a bad one," he said one morning, staring out at weather so thick he couldn't see the pine trees 20 feet away. "Might be stuck inside for days. You all right with that?" "I'll manage," Anna said, though the thought of being trapped in close quarters with Caleb and Luke for days on end sent her emotions spiraling in directions she didn't want to examine. "We have supplies?" "Plenty. That's not what worries me." Caleb glanced toward the loft where Luke was still sleeping. "He's going to go stir-crazy by day 2. 3-year-olds aren't meant to be cooped up." Caleb was right. By the afternoon of the first day, Luke had exhausted every toy and game and story, and had progressed to climbing the furniture and inventing increasingly dangerous activities that required constant intervention. By the second day, he was whining. By the third, he was having full-scale tantrums that left everyone frayed and exhausted. "I want to go outside," Luke screamed, his face red and tear-streaked. "I hate inside. Inside is stupid." "Luke," Caleb's voice was firm but strained. "We've talked about this. The storm's too dangerous. You go out there, you freeze. You understand? You die." "I don't care. I want out." Anna watched Caleb close his eyes and take a slow breath, clearly counting to 10 in his head. She'd seen him patient with Luke through 100 different challenges, but this storm was testing limits for all of them. The cabin felt smaller each hour, the walls pressing in, the constant proximity wearing on nerves that had no escape route. "Luke," Anna said quietly, kneeling down to his level, "I know you're angry, but yelling at your papa won't change the weather. The storm doesn't care if you're mad." "I'm not mad at papa. I'm mad at the stupid storm." Luke's voice cracked, and suddenly he was crying for real, not the angry tears of a tantrum, but the hopeless tears of a child who'd reached the end of his endurance. "I just want to play outside. I just want to run. Why can't I run?" Anna pulled him into her arms, half expecting him to push her away, but instead he collapsed against her, sobbing. She held him while he cried out his frustration and fear and the simple exhaustion of being 3 years old in an adult situation. Over his head, she met Caleb's eyes and saw her own weariness reflected back. "We need to tire him out," Caleb said finally. "Physically. He's got energy and nowhere to put it." "In here? How?" Caleb looked around the cabin, calculating. Then his face cleared. "Luke, you want to have a race?" Luke pulled back from Anna, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "What kind of race?" "The kind where you run from that wall to this wall as many times as you can before I count to 100. Think you can do it?" Luke's eyes lit up with the challenge. "I can do 1,000,000 times. Prove it. Ready? Go." Luke took off running, his small feet pounding across the wooden floor. Caleb started counting slowly while Anna moved the furniture to create a clear path. Luke ran back and forth, while Caleb counted and Anna cheered him on. When Caleb reached 100, Luke had made it across 23 times and was breathing hard but grinning. "My turn," Caleb said. "You count for me, buddy. Can you count to 100? "I can count to 50, Luke said proudly. "Maybe 60. "That's good enough. Count as high as you can. Miss Anna, you keep track of how many times I cross." What followed was possibly the most absurd hour Anna had ever witnessed. Caleb, a grown man of over 200 pounds, ran back and forth across the cabin while his son counted haltingly, and Anna tried not to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it. But it worked. By the time Caleb finished, 31 crossings and Luke's very slow count to 57, both father and son were exhausted and happy. "Your turn, Miss Anna," Luke announced. "You have to race too." "Oh, I don't think—" "Please?" Luke's eyes were wide and hopeful, all traces of his earlier misery gone. "Please race? I'll count real good for you." Anna looked at Caleb, who was grinning in a way she'd never seen, slightly breathless and completely unself-conscious. "You heard the boy. Your turn." So Anna found herself hitching up Clara's blue dress and running back and forth across the cabin floor while Luke counted and Caleb called encouragement. And somewhere in the middle of it, she started laughing, really laughing, the kind that came from deep in the belly and couldn't be stopped. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember the last time she'd done something purely for joy, with no purpose except the doing of it. When Luke's counting dissolved into giggles and Anna collapsed on the floor, completely winded, Caleb sat down beside her and they both just breathed, grinning like fools while Luke danced around them celebrating his successful counting. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done," Anna gasped. "Probably the stupidest thing I've done today," Caleb agreed. "But it worked. Look at him." Luke's energy was finally draining. The combination of crying, counting, and excitement had used up his reserves. Within an hour, he was asleep in the rocking chair, curled up like a cat, his face peaceful. "Thank God," Caleb muttered, slumping in his chair by the fire. "I love that kid more than life itself, but 3 days trapped inside with him is aging me about 10 years. He's just being a child, a healthy child, which is what you wanted." Anna was making tea, something to warm them both after the exertion. "You're doing well with him, Caleb. Better than well." Some days I'm not so sure. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. He accepted the tea she offered with a grateful nod. Makes me wonder what Clara would think. If she'd be proud or disappointed. She'd be proud. How could she not be? You kept him alive. You kept him loved. That's everything. Caleb was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. All right. That sack they made you wear. How long? Anna's hands tightened on her own cup. She should have known this question would come eventually. 3 towns? 3 weeks, maybe? Time kind of blurred together. And before that? Before the mail order business? Before that, I lived with my uncle's family in Philadelphia, after my mother died. Anna forced herself to keep her voice steady, factual. They took me in out of Christian duty and reminded me of that fact daily. I worked for my keep. I was grateful for what I got. Except my cousin Robert decided he was entitled to more than just my labor, and when I finally fought him off hard enough to leave a mark, they blamed me for it, called me unstable, dangerous. Said I needed a firm hand, so they shipped me west with instructions to Garrett about keeping me under control. Jesus Christ, Caleb's voice was low and furious. Your own family. Not really family, not in any way that mattered. They were related by blood, but that's all. Anna set down her tea before her shaking hands could spill it. The sack was Garrett's idea. Said my face would hurt my chances, that men wanted pretty wives, or at least plain ones. Said I was neither. Said the only way I'd get placed was if they couldn't see me until after the contract was signed. That's the biggest load of horse shit I've ever heard. Anna looked up, startled by the vehemence in his voice. Caleb was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Your face didn't hurt anything, he continued, each word deliberate. You're not ugly. Never were. And any man who thought so is a fool and a coward. You understand me? Caleb, no, listen. I need to say this because I don't think anyone said it to you properly. He leaned forward, his blue eyes locked on hers. When I cut that sack off and saw you for the first time, you want to know what I thought? Anna shook her head mutely, afraid to hear the answer, afraid not to hear it. I thought you looked scared and tired, and like you'd been through hell and somehow survived it. I thought you had the eyes of someone who'd learned not to hope for much, and that was the saddest damn thing I'd seen in years. He paused. But I also thought you were pretty. Maybe not in some fancy city way, maybe not like women in paintings, but pretty like the mountains are pretty, real and strong and worth looking at. And I thought any man who couldn't see that wasn't worth the air he breathed. Anna's eyes were burning with tears she refused to shed. Why are you telling me this? Because in a few months, spring's coming, and you're going to have to decide if you stay or go. And I want you to make that decision based on what you actually want, not on what you think you deserve. You deserve good things, Anna. You deserve to be seen and valued. Whether that's here or somewhere else, you deserve better than what you've gotten so far. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Anna was afraid to interpret. She wanted to ask what he meant, what he wanted, if there was any chance that the feelings growing in her chest had any reflection in his. But Luke chose that moment to stir in his chair, mumbling in his sleep, and the moment shattered. Caleb stood quickly, moving to check on his son. Anna sat by the fire and tried to calm her racing heart, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had Caleb just told her she was pretty? Had he just suggested he wanted her to stay? Or was she reading too much into simple kindness, letting her desperate heart construct fantasies from fragments of decency? The storm continued for 2 more days. They fell into a strange, intense rhythm. The 3 of them trapped together in the cabin's warm confines, learning each other's rhythms and habits in a way that felt both natural and charged with unspoken tension. Anna caught Caleb watching her sometimes when he thought she was focused on Luke. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence, of the way he moved through the space, of the sound of his voice and his laugh, and the rare moments when he let his guard down completely. Luke, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued to demand attention and entertainment. They told stories, played games, sang songs until their voices were hoarse. Caleb taught Luke to count higher, to recognize letters, to understand concepts that seemed advanced for 3 years old. Anna marveled at the patience he showed, the way he treated his son's questions with genuine respect rather than dismissal. On the fifth day, Anna woke to silence. Not the howling quiet of the storm, but actual silence. She climbed down from the loft to find Caleb already at the window, looking out. "Storm broke," he said without turning around. "Finally. World looks like it's made of glass out there." Anna joined him at the window and caught her breath. The storm had transformed everything. The snow had drifted into impossible shapes, smooth curves and sharp edges catching the morning light. Icicles hung from the cabin roof like crystal spears. The trees were weighted down with white, their branches creating intricate patterns against the blue sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful and clearly dangerous. That much snow meant days of digging out, of checking for damage, of working twice as hard just to maintain basic survival. "I need to check the barn, make sure nothing collapsed," Caleb said. "Clear paths, check the spring. Probably take most of the day. I'll keep Luke inside, keep him busy." "Good luck with that. Kid's going to want out the second he sees the sun." Caleb pulled on his heaviest coat, wound a scarf around his face. "But keep him in anyway. Snow's too deep, too unstable, too dangerous." He was right about Luke's reaction. The boy woke to sunshine and immediately started campaigning to go outside, to play in the snow, to build snow mountains and snow animals and snow everything. Anna distracted him with breakfast, with stories, with the promise that maybe, if the snow was safe and Papa said yes, they could go out later. It was enough to keep him occupied, but just barely. Through the window, Anna watched Caleb work. He moved with steady determination, shoveling paths, checking structures, hauling water, doing the 100 tasks that kept them alive in this beautiful, unforgiving place. She made hot food and kept it ready, knowing he'd come in eventually, frozen and exhausted and needing warmth. When he finally did come in, around midday, his face was red with cold and his eyes were troubled. "What's wrong?" Anna asked immediately, reading something in his expression that set off alarm bells. Caleb glanced at Luke, who was playing with wooden blocks by the fire, then spoke quietly. "Need to go to town tomorrow. Barn roof took damage. Nothing catastrophic, but it needs proper repairs before the next storm. Need lumber, nails, tar paper, things I don't have enough of stored." "How long will you be gone?" "Day and a half, maybe 2. Depends on conditions." He met her eyes steadily. "I don't like leaving you and Luke alone that long, but I don't have a choice. Roof goes, the horses suffer. Can't let that happen." Anna squared her shoulders, pushing down the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "We'll be fine. I know the routines. I know how to keep the fire going, take care of Luke, handle the chickens. We'll manage. I know you will. You're capable as hell." Caleb's voice softened. "But I still don't like it. Too many things can go wrong. If Luke gets sick again, if something happens, nothing's going to happen. And if it does, I'll handle it. You've taught me well, Caleb. You have to trust that." Something flickered in his eyes at her use of his name. She'd been careful to call him Mr. Thorne around Luke, keeping some veneer of formality, even though it felt increasingly ridiculous. But this was important. He needed to hear that she was strong enough, capable enough, worthy of his trust. "I do trust you," he said finally. "With Luke. With everything. If I didn't, I couldn't leave. You know that, right?" The weight of those words settled over Anna like a blanket. He trusted her with his son, with his home, with everything that mattered to him. It was a gift she hadn't known she needed, validation she'd been starving for since her mother died. "I won't let you down," she promised. Caleb left before dawn the next morning, while Luke was still sleeping. Anna stood at the door and watched him ride away on Smoke, the pack horse trailing behind, and felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto her shoulders. For the next 2 days, she was in charge. She was the one who had to keep things running, keep Luke safe, keep the careful systems Caleb had built from falling apart. The first day went smoothly enough. Luke was unusually cooperative, perhaps sensing that his father's absence required better behavior. They fell into their routines: breakfast, chores, play, lunch, quiet time, more play, dinner, bedtime stories. Anna kept the fire burning, checked the water trough for ice, fed the chickens while Luke watched from the cabin window. Everything that needed doing got done. But that night, After Luke was asleep, the cabin felt different, empty in a way it hadn't even during those first days before Luke came home. Anna sat by the fire and tried to read, tried to sew, tried to do anything to occupy her mind. But all she could think about was Caleb riding through the dark, navigating dangerous trails, dealing with townfolk who'd judged him and found him wanting. All she could think about was what would happen if he didn't come back. If something went wrong, if she was left here alone with a 3-year-old child and winter still months from ending. She'd have to go back to town, would have to throw herself on someone's mercy, probably end up as a servant in some household even less welcoming than her uncle's. And Luke, God, what would happen to Luke? He'd be orphaned, left to the care of whoever would take him. The thought made her physically ill. Anna forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. Caleb was fine. He'd made this journey hundreds of times. He knew these mountains better than anyone. He'd be back tomorrow, maybe the next day, and everything would go back to normal. This anxiety was irrational, born of too much time alone with her thoughts, and too much invested in a situation that had never been promised as permanent. She went to bed but couldn't sleep, lying in the dark and listening to Luke's soft breathing and the cabin's settling sounds and feeling more alone than she had in months. The second day was harder. Luke was cranky, missing his father and taking it out on Anna in the way 3-year-olds did, resisting everything, arguing about nothing, pushing boundaries just to push them. By mid-afternoon, Anna's patience was wearing thin. When Luke threw his lunch on the floor because he'd decided he didn't like carrots he'd eaten happily the day before, something in her snapped. Luke Thorne, you pick that up right now. No, I don't want carrots. Carrots are yucky. They weren't yucky yesterday. Pick them up. Make me! Anna took a deep breath, counted to 5, and knelt down to his level. Luke, I know you miss your papa. I know you're upset, but throwing food on the floor doesn't bring him back faster. It just makes a mess. Now you can pick it up and we can have a nice afternoon, or you can pick it up and go sit in the corner for thinking time. Your choice. Luke's lip trembled. For a moment, Anna thought he'd cry. But then his small shoulders straightened and he bent down and carefully picked up every piece of carrot, placing them on his plate. When he was done, he looked up at her with eyes that were too old for his face. Is Papa coming back? The question hit Anna like a punch to the gut. Of course he is. He promised, didn't he? Your papa always keeps his promises. Mama promised too. She said she'd always be here. But she's not. Anna pulled Luke into her lap, the small child who'd lost his mother and nearly died himself, and was now facing the fear that everyone he loved would eventually leave. Your mama didn't mean to break that promise, sweetheart. She wanted to stay. She wanted to watch you grow up more than anything. But sometimes people get sick or hurt, and they can't keep their promises even when they want to. That's different from what your papa's doing. He's just going to town for supplies. He's strong and careful, and he knows how to take care of himself. He'll be back. You promise? Anna knew she shouldn't make promises about things she couldn't control, but looking into Luke's terrified blue eyes, she couldn't help herself. I promise. Your papa is coming back. Luke nodded and relaxed against her, and they sat like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light faded and the cabin grew colder. Anna added wood to the fire one-handed, unwilling to let go of the small, warm weight of the child who'd somehow become hers in all the ways that mattered. When evening came with still no sign of Caleb, Anna made dinner and tried not to let Luke see her worry. They ate quietly, then played a game with wooden blocks. Then Anna read 3 stories instead of the usual one. Finally, Luke fell asleep in her arms by the fire, exhausted from emotion and the day's battles. Anna carried him up to the loft and tucked him into bed, then descended and sat by the fire, watching the flames and trying not to imagine all the terrible things that could happen to a man alone on a mountain trail in winter. Her mind conjured scenarios. A horse going lame, a fall through ice, an encounter with a bear or mountain lion, bandits, illness, injury, a dozen different disasters. She was so lost in dark thoughts that she didn't hear the door at first. It was only when cold air rushed in that she looked up and saw him, Caleb, standing in the doorway covered in snow and exhaustion, but alive, whole, home. Anna was on her feet before she realized she'd moved, crossing the cabin in 3 strides. You're back. Thank God you're back. I was so worried. Luke was asking if you'd come back, and I didn't know what to say, and she stopped abruptly, realizing she'd grabbed the front of Caleb's coat and was practically shaking him, all pretense of calm competence abandoned in the flood of relief. She tried to step back, to compose herself, but Caleb's hands came up to her shoulders, holding her steady. Hey, easy. I'm fine. Everything's fine, just took longer than expected. Had to wait for the sawmill to open, then the trail was worse than I thought. But I'm here now, we're all here. His voice was gentle, the kind of gentle you'd use with a spooked animal or a frightened child. Anna realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face without permission. I'm sorry. I don't know why I just thought, I know. I'm sorry I worried you. Caleb pulled her forward just slightly, just enough that her forehead rested against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through all the layers of clothing, steady and strong and real. You did good, Anna. Taking care of Luke, keeping everything running. You did real good. They stood like that for a long moment, Anna crying quietly against Caleb's chest while he held her shoulders and let her fall apart. It wasn't romantic, wasn't anything but two people who'd been through something difficult and survived. But it mattered. It mattered more than Anna had words for. Finally, she pulled back, wiping her eyes roughly. I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. I shouldn't have... Stop apologizing. You were scared. That's human. Nothing wrong with it. Caleb shrugged out of his coat, hanging it by the door. Luke asleep? Yes. He was worried about you too. Asked if you were coming back. Something pained crossed Caleb's face. Poor kid. He's had too much loss already. Shouldn't have to worry about losing his father too. I told him you always keep your promises. Good. That's good. Caleb moved to the fire, warming his hands. I got everything I need for the barn. Should have it repaired in a few days. Also picked up some things in town, cloth for a dress for you if you want to make one, and candy for Luke, and coffee because we were running low. You didn't have to. I wanted to. You're part of this household now, Anna. You get to have things too. He looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. And speaking of that, I need to tell you something while I was in town. Anna's heart started pounding. What? Ran into Garrett. He asked about you, how you were working out. I told him fine, more than fine. Then he said something about how the contract was for a year minimum, and after that we'd have to renegotiate terms if I wanted to extend. Caleb's jaw tightened. So I bought it outright. The full contract, all remaining time, any extensions, paid him what he asked and got the papers signed proper. You're not his anymore. Not anyone's but your own. Anna stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You bought out my contract? I did. Because the thought of that bastard having any say in your life made me want to put my fist through a wall. And because I wanted you to know, when you decide about staying or leaving come spring, it's entirely your choice. No one owns you. No one has claims on you. You're free, Anna. Completely free. The words were everything she'd ever wanted to hear, and somehow the most terrifying thing imaginable. Because freedom meant choice, and choice meant risk. She could leave, could walk away come spring and start over somewhere new, owing nothing to anyone. Or she could stay, could choose this cabin, this child, this man, and risk her heart in ways that might destroy her if it all fell apart. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Don't have to say anything tonight. Just wanted you to know. The papers are in my pack if you want to see them. But for now, I'm freezing and exhausted and I need food and sleep. Think you can heat up some of whatever you made for dinner? Anna nodded mutely and moved to the stove, her mind spinning. Free. She was free. And Caleb had given her that freedom, had paid for it without asking anything in return. What kind of man did that? What kind of man looked at a woman bought under duress and decided the right thing to do was give her back her choices? They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much conversation. When they were done, Caleb banked the fire and they went to their respective sleeping places without ceremony. But as Anna lay in the darkness of the loft with Luke sleeping peacefully beside her, she knew something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the unwanted bride anymore. Wasn't the woman in the sack or the poor relation or the mail-order disaster. She was Anna Rowe, free woman. And come spring, she'd have to figure out what that meant and what she wanted to do with it. But tonight, She could just rest in the knowledge that she'd kept her promise to Luke, that Caleb had come home safe, that the three of them were together under one roof while the mountain winter pressed close outside. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The knowledge of her freedom changed something in Anna, though she couldn't have articulated exactly what. She moved through the following days with a lightness she hadn't felt since before her mother died, as if some weight she'd been carrying had finally been set down. The contract papers sat in the trunk near her pallet. Caleb had given them to her the morning after he returned, wordlessly handing over the folded documents that proved she belonged to no one but herself. She'd read them 3 times, tracing the signatures and stamps that made it official, barely believing it was real. Winter continued its slow march toward spring, each day bringing imperceptible changes that accumulated into transformation. The sun rose earlier and set later. The quality of light shifted from the flat white of deep winter to something richer, more golden. The snow, while still deep, developed a crust that could sometimes bear weight. And inside the cabin, the three of them settled into rhythms that felt less like an arrangement and more like a family. Luke continued to grow and thrive, his energy boundless now that the last traces of illness had faded. He followed Caleb everywhere when weather permitted, a small shadow learning to walk in his father's footsteps, literally, placing his little boots in the impressions Caleb's larger ones left in the snow. He helped with chores in the way 3-year-olds helped, which meant making everything take 3 times as long, but doing it with such earnest determination that neither adult had the heart to discourage him. And he'd taken to calling Anna Ma more often than not, the word slipping out naturally when he was excited or scared or just wanting attention. The first few times, Anna had gently corrected him, reminding him that she was Miss Anna, not his mother. But Caleb had stopped her one evening after Luke had gone to sleep. "Let him call you what feels right to him," Caleb had said quietly. "Clara would want him to have a mother's love, even if it's not from her, and you—" He'd paused, choosing words carefully. "You love him like he's yours. Anyone can see that. Why make him pretend otherwise?" So Anna had stopped correcting, and the word Ma had lodged itself into her heart like a burr, painful and precious all at once. She wasn't Luke's mother, would never be Clara, would never have carried him or birthed him or been the first person he'd loved. But she could be this, the woman who tucked him in at night, who kissed his scraped knees, who sang him songs and told him stories, and showed him every day that he was cherished. If that made her Ma in his eyes, who was she to deny him? The question of spring loomed larger as the weeks passed. Caleb had made good on his promise about the barn, spending several cold days on the roof, patching and reinforcing until it was solid enough to withstand whatever weather came next. He'd also spent more time than usual checking the trails, gauging the snow depth, watching the sky with the experienced eye of someone reading signs Anna was only beginning to understand. "Month? Maybe 6 weeks," he said one morning in mid-March, standing at the window with his coffee. "Then the passes will be clear enough for safe travel. Creek's already running higher. You can hear it if you listen. Snow's melting up high." Anna's hands stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "That soon? Time moves whether we want it to or not." Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "You been thinking about what comes next?" She had been thinking about it, had been thinking about almost nothing else during the long nights when she couldn't sleep, lying in the dark and trying to imagine a future that made sense. Stay or go? Safety or possibility? The known quantity of this cabin and these people, or the unknown of a world that had never been particularly kind to women with no family and no resources? "Some," she admitted. "Haven't reached any conclusions yet." Caleb nodded, still not looking at her. "Well, you've got time. Few more weeks at least, no rush." But there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested otherwise, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of worry he wouldn't voice. Anna wanted to ask what he was thinking, what he wanted, whether her staying or leaving would matter to him beyond the practical considerations of losing household help. But Luke chose that moment to wake up and come tumbling down the ladder demanding breakfast and attention, and the moment passed. The days grew longer and warmer, though warmer was relative. It still froze hard every night, and snow still fell occasionally, but there was a softness in the air now, a promise of change. The chickens began laying more regularly. The horses grew restless in the barn, sensing the shift in seasons. And Caleb started talking about spring work, garden plots to prepare, fences to repair, all the maintenance that winter had postponed. Lot to do once the ground thaws, he said one evening while they worked side by side preparing dinner. Luke was playing nearby, building increasingly elaborate structures with his wooden blocks. More than I can manage alone, truth be told. Was thinking I might need to hire someone from town for a few weeks. Help with the heavy work. Anna kept her eyes on the carrots she was chopping. That makes sense. Unless, Caleb stopped, started again. Unless you were planning to stay. In which case, I could probably manage without hired help. But I don't want to assume, don't want to pressure you into anything. You're not pressuring me. Good. That's good. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then added softly, but I'd like to know, Anna, one way or another. Not because I'm trying to force a decision, but because I need to plan. Need to know what I'm working with. It was a fair request, more than fair given that he'd been patient for months while she wrestled with herself. Anna set down her knife and turned to face him properly. Can I ask you something first? Of course. If I stay, what would that look like? Would I still be hired help? Would I have wages? Would there be a contract? I need to understand what I'd be agreeing to. Caleb's jaw worked as he considered his answer. Finally, he set down the pot he'd been holding and met her eyes directly. I've been thinking about that a lot, and here's what I've come up with, though you're free to negotiate if it doesn't suit. He took a breath, and Anna could see him steeling himself for something. If you stay, it wouldn't be as hired help. It'd be as family. My wife, if you'd be willing. Luke's mother in truth as well as practice. A full partner in this homestead, with equal say in decisions and equal claim to everything we build. I'm not rich, but what I have would be half yours. The cabin, the land, the animals, all of it. Anna's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. You're asking me to marry you? I am. Not because I need a housekeeper or because Luke needs a mother, though both those things are true, but because... He stopped, his face working with emotion. Because these past months, you've made this place feel like home again. Because I wake up in the morning and I'm grateful you're here. Because I watch you with Luke and I see kindness and patience and love. And I think Clara would have liked you, would have approved. Because when I thought about you leaving, about this cabin going back to being just me and Luke, it felt like losing something precious before I'd fully understood I had it. Caleb, I'm not asking you to love me, he continued, the words coming faster now, like he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. I know that's not something you can force, and I know this situation isn't what anyone dreams of. You were bought like property, and I was the man who bought you, and that's a hell of a foundation for anything. But I respect you, Anna. I admire you, and I hope that over time, maybe we could build something good together, something real. Anna realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face while Luke played obliviously a few feet away. You said you weren't asking me to love you. I'm not. I wouldn't presume, but what if I already do? The words burst out before Anna could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. What if I've been half in love with you since that first night when you told me I deserved better? What if every day I've spent here has made it worse until I can't imagine being anywhere else? With anyone else? What if the thought of leaving makes me feel like I'm being torn in half? Caleb stared at her, his blue eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. Anna, I'm not Clara, she said, needing him to understand. I'll never be her. I can't replace her or be what she was to you. But I can be myself. I can love you as I am and love Luke with everything I have and try my best to be a good wife and partner and mother. If that's enough, if I'm enough, then yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. For a moment, Caleb didn't move. Then, slowly, carefully, he crossed the distance between them and cupped her face in his calloused hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. You're more than enough. You've always been more than enough. I just didn't know if you could see it. I'm starting to, Anna whispered. You've been teaching me, you and Luke both. Caleb smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and suddenly Anna could see what he must have looked like as a younger man before grief and responsibility had carved lines into his features. So that's a yes? You'll marry me? That's a yes. Papa, what's happening? Luke's voice cut through the moment. He'd abandoned his blocks and was staring at them with wide, curious eyes. Why is Miss Anna crying? Are you being mean to her? Caleb laughed, the sound slightly shaky. No, buddy, opposite of mean. I just asked Miss Anna if she'd like to stay with us forever, be part of our family. What do you think about that? Luke's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. Forever? She'd be here forever? If she wants to be, if that's all right with you. Luke launched himself at Anna, wrapping his small arms around her legs with enough force to nearly knock her over. Yes, 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 stay forever, Ma. Please stay forever. Anna picked him up, this child who'd somehow claimed her heart, and held him close while he squeezed her neck and chattered excitedly about all the things they'd do together, all the adventures they'd have, all the ways their life would be perfect now that she was staying. Over his head, her eyes met Caleb's, and the look that passed between them needed no words. This was real. This was happening. This strange, unexpected family that had formed from desperation and necessity was choosing to become permanent. That evening, after Luke had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Caleb and Anna sat by the fire and talked about practicalities. When to marry, how to manage the announcement in town, what changes might need to be made to the cabin. But underneath the practical discussions ran a current of something deeper, a tentative exploration of what their life together might actually look like. I need you to know, Caleb said at one point, his voice serious, that I'm not expecting, that is, I understand if you need time before. He stopped, clearly struggling. The marriage bed. I won't force anything. We can take that slow as you need. Anna felt her face flush, but she appreciated his consideration. Thank you. I don't have experience with, neither do I, much. Clara was my first and only, and it was good between us, but it took time to learn each other. I'm willing to take that time with you too. No pressure. No expectations except respect and patience. The conversation was awkward, both of them dancing around words they'd been raised to consider too intimate for open discussion. But there was kindness in the awkwardness, a mutual commitment to honesty that made Anna feel safer than any amount of smooth talking would have. I want children, she said suddenly. Eventually. I know Luke is yours and Clara's, and I'd never try to replace her in his memories. But I'd like to have my own too, if we're blessed that way. Would that be all right? Caleb's face softened. More than all right. I'd love to have more children, give Luke siblings, fill this cabin with noise and chaos. He paused. But I won't lie, childbirth scares me. What happened with Clara, I know, and I can't promise it won't be dangerous. But women have babies every day and survive. We'll be careful. We'll have the doctor. We'll do everything right. Anna reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. We'll face it together, like everything else. Caleb squeezed her hand, his grip warm and strong. Together, I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the fire burn down. Finally, Caleb spoke again. There's something else I need to tell you, about Clara. Anna tensed slightly but nodded. All right. I loved her deeply. And I still do in a way. You can't just stop loving someone because they're gone. She'll always be part of me, part of Luke, part of this cabin. He turned to look at Anna directly. But what I feel for you, it's not less because I loved her first. It's not a betrayal of her memory. It's just different, new, its own thing. And I need you to know that you're not a replacement or a consolation prize. You're Anna. And that's who I want. That's who I choose. The words broke something open in Anna's chest, some last defense she'd been holding on to. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for believing it. They made plans to marry in April, once the trails were fully passable, and they could make the journey to Helena for a proper ceremony. Caleb wanted it official, wanted papers filed with the territorial clerk, wanted no ambiguity about Anna's status as his wife and Luke's mother. He also wanted witnesses beyond just themselves, wanted the community to acknowledge what they were building. Might get some talk, he warned. Mail-order bride marrying the man who bought her. Some folks will have opinions. Let them talk. I've survived worse than gossip. That you have. Caleb smiled at her, and Anna felt warmth bloom in her chest. That you definitely have. The weeks that followed were strange and sweet, a period of adjustment as they shifted from their old dynamic to something new. They were more physically affectionate now. Nothing scandalous, but small touches in passing, hands that lingered when reaching for the same object. A casual kiss dropped on Anna's head when Caleb passed her chair. Luke noticed and seemed delighted by it, often demanding that they both kiss him goodnight, one on each cheek, before he'd consent to sleep. Anna also began wearing the green dress she'd found at the bottom of Clara's trunk, the fine one with the lace collar. When she'd asked Caleb if it was appropriate, he'd looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Clara would want you to wear it. She'd want her things used, not moldering in a trunk. And besides, he'd smiled slightly. You look beautiful in it. Seems a shame to waste it. The compliment had made Anna's heart race, and she'd worn the dress to dinner that night, feeling almost pretty for the first time in her life. As April approached, Caleb made another trip to town, this time with Anna and Luke accompanying him. It was Luke's first journey down the mountain since his illness, and he was beside himself with excitement, chattering endlessly about all the things he'd see and do. Anna was more nervous, knowing this would be her first time facing Helena as Caleb's intended, rather than as the desperate woman in a sack. The journey took most of the day, the trails still muddy and difficult despite the warming weather. But when Helena finally came into view, sprawling and rough and alive with spring activity, Anna felt a strange sense of completion. She'd arrived here broken and terrified and hidden. She was returning whole, chosen, and free. They stayed with the Weavers who'd cared for Luke during his illness and who greeted Anna with warmth that seemed genuine. Mrs. Weaver was a plump, kind woman with intelligent eyes who took one look at Anna and Caleb together and smiled knowingly. "About time, Caleb Thorne," she said, pulling Anna into an unexpected hug. "That cabin needed a woman's touch, and that boy needed a mother. You're good for them. I could tell just from how you're standing together." The wedding was held 2 days later, in the small church on the edge of town. It was a modest affair, the Weavers as witnesses, a handful of Caleb's acquaintances, the doctor who'd saved Luke's life, and a few curious townspeople who'd heard about the mountain man finally remarrying. Anna wore the green dress and wildflowers in her hair that Luke had insisted on picking himself. Caleb wore his best clothes, brushed clean and pressed, looking uncomfortable but determined. The ceremony itself was simple. The preacher kept it short, perhaps sensing that Caleb wasn't one for flowery speeches or excessive sentiment. Anna repeated the vows in a voice that shook only slightly, promising to love and honor and cherish, meaning every word with an intensity that surprised her. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Clara's ring, he told her privately, offered not as a replacement but as a continuity, a way of honoring both women. Anna felt something click into place deep in her soul. She was married. She was Anna Thorne now, with a husband and a son and a home and a future that belonged to her. When the preacher told Caleb he could kiss his bride, Caleb had leaned in carefully, giving Anna time to pull back if she wanted. But she didn't want to. She met him halfway, and their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle and tentative and full of promise. Luke, standing between them, had cheered loudly enough to make the congregation laugh, breaking the solemnity of the moment in the best possible way. The reception afterward was held at the Weavers' home, simple food and cider, nothing fancy, but warm and welcoming. People came to congratulate them, to offer advice, to comment on how good Anna looked now compared to when she'd arrived. A few made veiled references to the circumstances of their meeting, but Caleb shut those down with a look that could freeze water. "My wife," he said simply, his hand on Anna's back, "deserves your respect. She's earned it and then some. Anyone who can't offer that can leave now." No one left. And after that, the comments stopped. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration was winding down, Anna found herself standing at the edge of the Weaver's yard, looking out at the mountains that had become her home. She was thinking about the journey, from Philadelphia to Kansas City to Cheyenne to Helena, from desperation to despair to something that looked remarkably like happiness. Thinking about the woman she'd been, hiding in a burlap sack, and the woman she'd become, standing in sunshine as somebody's wife and somebody's mother, and most importantly, as herself. "You all right?" Caleb's voice came from behind her, warm and concerned. Anna turned to face her husband. Her husband, she'd have to get used to thinking that, and smiled. "I'm wonderful. Just thinking about how far I've come, how different everything is." "Any regrets?" "None. Not a single one." She moved closer, letting Caleb wrap his arms around her. "You saved my life, you know. That day at the trading post, you saved my life." "You saved mine too," Caleb said quietly, his chin resting on top of her head. "Didn't realize how dead I'd been inside until you showed up and reminded me what living felt like." They stood like that for a while, holding each other while the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Finally, Luke ran over, demanding attention and announcing he was hungry again and asking when they could go home. "Soon, buddy," Caleb promised. "Soon we'll head home." Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. They returned to the cabin 3 days later, arriving in late afternoon to find everything just as they'd left it. But somehow it looked different to Anna now. Not just Caleb's cabin that she lived in, but their home that they shared. She walked through the familiar space with new eyes, already planning small changes, already thinking about the garden she'd plant, the curtains she'd make, the life they'd build within these log walls. That night, after Luke was tucked into bed and the cabin was quiet, Anna and Caleb lay together in the loft for the first time as husband and wife. They were both nervous, both uncertain, but also committed to figuring it out together. What happened between them that night was tender and awkward and sweet, a beginning rather than a perfection, and when it was over, they held each other and talked in whispers about the future. "Thank you," Anna said at one point, her head on Caleb's shoulder, "for choosing me, for seeing something worth choosing." "Thank you for staying," Caleb replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm, "for taking a chance on a stubborn mountain man and his impossible child." "Our impossible child," Anna corrected gently. "He's ours now." "Ours," Caleb agreed, and Anna could hear the smile in his voice. The months that followed were full of work and growth, and the slow deepening of love that came from choosing each other every day. They planted a garden together, turning the soil and arguing amiably about where each vegetable should go. They repaired fences and maintained equipment and did all the endless tasks that kept a homestead functioning. They raised Luke together, navigating the challenges of parenting as a team, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, and finding ways to complement each other. And slowly, carefully, they built a marriage that was uniquely theirs, not what Caleb had with Clara, not what Anna had dreamed of as a girl, but something real and solid and good. They fought occasionally, both too stubborn for complete harmony, but they learned to fight fair and forgive quickly. They laughed often, finding joy in small things and in each other. They made love with increasing confidence and comfort, learning each other's bodies and preferences, building intimacy one night at a time. By summer, Anna knew she was pregnant. She told Caleb on a warm evening while they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset, and the look of joy mixed with terror on his face made her laugh and cry simultaneously. "We'll be careful," she promised, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I'll do everything right. The doctor will come. We'll prepare. It'll be all right." "I'm going to worry every damn day until this baby's here safe," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Fair warning." "I know, and I love you for it." "Love you too," Caleb said, the words still coming with slight difficulty. He'd been alone so long, had guarded his heart so carefully, that vulnerability didn't come easily. But he was trying. They both were. The baby came in late winter, a daughter with dark hair and Anna's gray eyes and lungs that announced her displeasure at the cold mountain air with impressive volume. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caleb's face went white with remembered fear. But Anna was strong, and the doctor was skilled, and when it was over, they had a healthy, furious baby girl and a mother who was exhausted but alive. They named her Clara Rose Thorne, honoring both the woman who'd come before and the new life they were building. Luke was enchanted with his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly and bring her rocks and flowers and various treasures he deemed worthy of her attention. "Ma, she's so small," he whispered, holding her carefully with Anna's help. "Was I this small?" "Even smaller," Anna told him. "You were tiny when you were born. Your papa could hold you in one hand." "Did my first mama love me?" The question, asked with four-year-old directness, made both Anna and Caleb freeze. They'd talked about this, about how to handle questions about Clara, about how to honor her memory while building their new family. But theory was different than practice. "She loved you more than anything in the world," Anna said carefully. "She wanted you so badly, and when you were born, she was so happy. She would have stayed with you forever if she could have. But sometimes people get sick and have to leave, even when they don't want to. That doesn't mean they stop loving you. Your first mama loves you still, wherever she is. And I love you too. You have two mamas who love you, one in heaven and one right here. That makes you pretty lucky." Luke considered this gravely, then nodded. "I am lucky. And now Rose has two mamas too, if you count the heaven one." "That's right." "Good. Everyone should have lots of people who love them." Out of the mouths of babes, Anna thought, meeting Caleb's eyes over their children's heads and seeing tears there that matched her own. The years that followed were full and rich, and sometimes hard, but always purposeful. They had another child, a son they named William after Anna's father, who died when she was small. They expanded the cabin, adding a room for the growing family. They became fixtures in Helena's community, not exactly town people, but respected members who came down the mountain for church and supplies and the occasional social gathering. People still talked sometimes about how they'd met, about the mail-order bride and the mountain man who'd bought her, but the talk had lost its edge, had become just part of their story rather than a scandal. And when people looked at Anna and Caleb together, looked at the way they moved in sync, the way they communicated without words, the way they'd built something solid from unpromising beginnings, most just saw a couple who'd figured out how to love each other well. Luke grew into a clever, kind boy who adored his younger siblings and showed early talent for working with wood and machinery. Rose turned out to be fearless and strong-willed, already showing signs of being able to wrap her father around her little finger. William was quiet and thoughtful, happiest with a book or watching the world with curious eyes. And Anna became the woman she'd always had the potential to be, but had never had the space or safety to discover. She was confident now, comfortable in her own skin in a way she'd never been when she was young. The woman who'd worn a burlap sack was still part of her, would always be part of her, but she'd integrated that pain into something larger and more complex. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and alchemized it into the best thing, into a life worth living and a family worth fighting for. One spring morning, years after that first journey down the mountain, Anna stood at the window of their expanded cabin and watched her family in the yard. Caleb was showing Luke how to repair a fence, their dark heads bent together over the work. Rose was chasing chickens, still demon chickens, still mean, but now there were more of them, while shrieking with laughter. William sat on the porch steps reading in the morning sun. "Ma," Rose's voice carried clearly, "come look at this flower. It's got a bug on it." Anna smiled and headed for the door, calling back that she was coming. But she paused on the threshold, looking back at the cabin that had become her home, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She'd been bought for 50 silver coins and the promise of a month's supplies. She'd been considered worthless, unwanted, a burden to be discarded. She'd worn a sack over her face because people couldn't bear to look at her. And now she was Anna Thorne, wife and mother, partner and friend, beloved and necessary. Now she was home. The mountain man who'd bought her had seen something no one else had, not just potential, but worth. He'd seen a person in pain and decided that kindness mattered more than convenience. And in doing so, he'd given her the chance to discover who she really was, who she could become when someone believed in her enough to give her space to grow. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than a fairy tale, because it was real, messy and complicated and hard-won and absolutely, perfectly worth it. "Ma, the bug is eating the flower!" Anna laughed and stepped out into the sunshine, into the life she'd built flower by flower, choice by choice, day by careful day. And as Caleb looked up from his work and smiled at her, that rare, warm smile that was hers and hers alone, she knew without question that she'd made the right choice all those years ago when she'd said yes to staying, yes to marriage, yes to this impossible, wonderful life. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and she'd never been more grateful for anything in her life.